Stop! Oh my god. What in the... I don't know what's happening right now. Everything is going real shitty just all of a sudden. I had everything set up like 15 minutes ago and like went to make my coffee for the day. Or for the live rather. I had Pete's this morning and then I switched to Bushwhacker for the live. And I went to go make my coffee and I came back and I got everything set up. And thank you. I hope your day's going good. And I like went to go live, right? And then it was like, you're live on another device. Please end that before starting another one on this account. And I was like, I am not live on another device. I shouldn't be. And so, like, I shut TikTok and reopened it and went to the live page, started a live, and then it ended immediately after I hit start. And then my mother called and left me 2 voicemails in very quick succession. So all of this was just a lot. This was all in the past, like, 5 minutes. I technically was trying to go live at 7:58. So I don't know what that was about. I'm not sure what was going on, in all honesty. I'm not sure what caused that. Because it's never done anything like that to me before. Yeah, so... And I don't know why it booted me the first time. It didn't give me a reason. It just, like, booted me off. Maybe it was because, last time, we're not discussing it, but... Oh, thank you. But yeah, I'm not sure what happened. And my mother just called and left me 2 voicemails. Hold on. I'm getting rid of these. Sorry. Enjoy the close-up of my thumb. Go away. Oof. Sorry. I hope she doesn't try and call again. Yeah. It shouldn't be. I don't know. The live was being super funky. Oh, really? I love fan art. I, like, never expect it. So, like, that's always awesome. But the last one that I got, from my Villain Shinzo series, when they drew that one, and that one's still my phone background. I just want to let Simp for Danks know. I don't think Simp for Danks is here, but that's still my phone background. I love it so much. So awesome. Thank you. If you don't care to send it to me, obviously you're under no obligation to show anyone your artwork at all. But I love seeing them. It's awesome. I'm going to take this scarf off. It's actually kind of hot in here. I'm going to take this mic off this. Oh no, it's entwined in the scarf. I'm going to have problems. I'm sure the audio quality just like went haywire. I'll tell you, that scarf works. Oh, thank you. So yeah, I'm not sure what went on with the live when it started. It was super weird. It was super weird. So I'm not sure what caused that, but hopefully it doesn't happen again. Hopefully I don't get banned again. Not that I'm doing anything worthy of being banned. I'm just existing, hopefully. And I'm going to go ahead and let you know right now, during intermission, Danky isn't doing a rant because his sister's in town. And they are creating a lot of noise in the next room. I don't know if you can hear them, but they're here, but they're not. Dinky's not going to rant. Okay, yeah, this is clipped. I wanted to make sure it was clipped in place so it didn't crash to the ground like last time. Oh, thank you for the compliment. Also, thank you for the donut. Do cause technical difficulties. Yeah, we're not going into it. But, yeah, Dinky's not doing a rant this time, but I do have, when TikTok let me out of timeout, a few days ago, it did let me download that live. So I do have it. I need to upload it, but I don't have the second half, obviously. It was on Instagram, which is linked to my bio, but it wouldn't let me download it. It said I didn't have enough space, and the only way to get both of them on my phone, I had to go exit out, clear out file space, but then when I got back, it wouldn't let me have the option anymore. So the recording is on Instagram, but I'll have to re-record the audio because it won't let me have it. It won't let me have my own content off of Instagram. You only get the option when it posts, like in the moment. Yeah, maybe it'll let us get through a whole live. Technically, I'm amazed. We've made it through 2 whole books, and we've only gotten banned once per book. That's actually kind of crazy, considering the content. I'm amazed more people haven't been offended. But yeah, we've pretty much gotten banned once per book now. So that's neat. I'm not jinxing us. And I'm not feeding into your jinxes anymore, Swiftblood. So don't at me. Yeah. Okay. It's a testament to how good Bushwhacker is. But, Dinky's sister showed up with, like, Starbucks cold brew and was like, I hate this. And I was like, what the fuck is that? Let me taste it. And it tasted straight up just like chocolate milk. So I mixed it into Bushwhacker. And it's still good. It's a little too sweet, but it's fine. We had to get rid of this cold brew, and Dinky was like, you're the only one that can make this taste good, maybe? So I was like, sure. So I took it. Just say no. Just say no. Don't even worry about it. What's the context for the question? I don't understand the context for the question. Decently fixed by good coffee. For a fairy, gender neutral. Okay, one, if they're not content being with your friend, being your friend, and they can't respect your feelings, then they weren't really your friend to begin with. Just gonna throw that out there. If they're that unhappy with friendship, then they don't respect your boundaries and you don't need them around anyway. Good riddance. That's what I would do. But then again, I also don't have friends. I have Dinky and Sarah, and that's it. Hi. A lot of new people in here. Don't report me. I do have you. I have book club. They're the closest things to friends I have. And dad. Yeah, but you're dad. You're in your whole own category with your own lone. You have no competitors. Nah. I have Dinky and Sarah, my partners. They're in the other room. One of them is busy making a baseball bat. The other one's hanging out with her sister and making a hell of a lot of noise. I think they're playing Subnautica. Yeah, you win. Yeah. No problem. I'm assuming it's for your art, so good luck with that. Oh, he's working on his paranoia agent cosplay. So he was making a bat and then trying to bend it and then painting it. Yeah. It's a whole, yeah. We got to get it. I told him, he was like, last time I couldn't go I couldn't go to a con like this because they wouldn't let me have my rollerblades and they made me take them off and I didn't have shoes. So I walked around in socks the entire time. And I was like, well, we got to get you some Heelys. The thing is like he tried to do that with a normal bat and the bat just broke. Bats are more apt to break than bend. So he made one. He just 3D printed it in like 4 separate pieces and like affixed them all together and then heat gunned the end of it and like heated up the filament until it got like decently hot and then smacked it against some shit to bend it. To my knowledge, that's how he did it. I'm good. How are you? Favorite colors? I like black and gray and purple. Yeah. Some greens. Like, I like forest green, but I don't like a whole lot of other greens. But around the spectrum, purple, black, and gray. Yeah, it was an interesting process. It looks really good so far. And he's working on fixing Denki's support item because Denki's support item broke. Yeah, I like forest green. Forest green's fun for me. Yeah. I ship myself with sleep. I don't really need to ship myself with anybody. I have 2 partners in the next room and they're both batshit crazy. And if I ended up with anybody else, I might lose my mind. They already drive me completely crazy. I need more caffeine and more sleep every day. So I would prefer sleep. I have for like the past month just needed a whole day to myself to like not interact with anyone, with a pot of coffee, my cat, and a book. And that's all I want, and I never get it. That's what I want my next birthday. That's all I want. That's why I don't tell people my birthday either. And you're never gonna know it because then people send me stuff, and I want to be left alone. I want to be left alone. Yeah, Lady Eva. Everybody Venmo Lady Eva. If every single one of the people in this chat Venmo's Lady Eva, the ship, I'll ship it. Good choice. Solid choice. Then again, if I have money, I can't even deposit it. Like, my bank is a truck. Because the tornado completely decimated our bank and they haven't even started working on it at all. So, like, there's just a truck where the bank used to be that's like pretending to be the bank. Well, it is the bank, but like there's never a person in there. So it's all automated and it doesn't want to accept anything. It's like broken and I don't really know what to do about it. So I have a bunch of money that I can't deposit. So I'm consistently walking around on patrol with about $600 cash in my pocket. It's not the way you want to go. Oh yeah, subpar money truck, for real. I keep having my my patrol guy, come with me to the fucking truck every single night when we get off to like go and deposit it because it's real shady. And like, there's just like nothing to do if it doesn't work. Like, there's nobody to contact. The bank is like boarded up. Like, it's just got boarded up with like caution tape around it and shit. It looks terrible. It looks like the shadiest fucking shit you've ever seen. It never works. I always go to deposit it and I gotta make my car payment and I can't. Yeah. My problem isn't that I don't have money. My problem is that I can't get my money into the account to pay my bills with it. It's not cool. And I think the only other location in town that I knew of isn't working either. Like, it's like been out of commission since before the tornado hit, so it's not even there, and so I can't even go to the other location that we had in town. So I'm like, do I just need a new bank? Like, what do I do? It's really lame. It's been super not cool lately. I hope you all are doing well. You'd be the only one to try to pay your bill. I don't want to pay a bill with cash. I want a receipt. I want a transaction. Like, I want like a confirmation number, something, some record that I paid it. With cash, there is no record. And my dad told me not to pay my bills with cash. So, yeah, you need that proof. I ain't going to, no. I can't get it into the bank account to have. It's real lame. Yeah, I might have to, oh my God, I have to like mail it too. That's going to be so shitty. Chime works for me. You can go to 7-Eleven or Walgreens, put your cash in the account. Is there like a surcharge for that? Like, you have to pay for it? I'm real annoyed. It'd be one thing if it was just a check, because a check you can do mobile deposit, but I have cash. I have a lot of cash. Oh, sweet. I'll have to look into that then. Thanks, Nightshade. I missed some of the live because I'm leaving home from the store on back roads. Ugh. Well, it's about time for us to get started. If you don't know what we do here and you're new and you've never been at my live before or you've never caught them, you might not know. But if you look at the title of this live, it doesn't say like Shinzo fucks around and finds out or anything. Because I'm not, and that's not what we do here. And what we do here is I read you a book. So if you don't like being read to, which, why would you? Then you're probably in the wrong spot because we're not going to be chit-chatting this entire time. I'm bad with people and I only have about 15 minutes of a battery in me before I deplete. So we've been reading a book, and if you don't know what book we're reading, how are you in this live still? Go look at the title. It's Johannes Cabal the Detective. It's book 2 in the Johannes Cabal series. If you don't know what that is, there's a link to the YouTube where I read you the entire thing on YouTube. The only thing that's missing is last week's because I have to re-record the tail end of it. But it's coming. I'm going to do it. And we're almost finished with book 2. We only have the last chapter, and it's kind of like a stinger, but I'm going to call it chapter 18. And then we're done with this one. So if you're just tuning in now, this is the end, and you're not going to know what happens. So scram. Go find out what happens and get back here. I'll wait. We'll wait. That's a lie. We won't. Anyway. We're going to finish this one. So you're not going to know what happens if you haven't tuned in before now. But don't worry, you can always get the book yourself. There's also an audiobook that probably sounds a lot better than me. There's my YouTube. You can even just ask a number of the people that are normally in here, and they will probably fill you in some DMs if you really want them to, and you want to join the book club. We do this every week. Every week on Tuesdays at 8. I'd say sharp, but I'm never here on time. So, with that out of the way, we left off in a bit of a predicament. This is the final showdown. Like I said, you're going to be real confused if you've never been here. We're on a ship. Johannes Cabal just returned, even though he didn't had to, made his big grand entrance, and then he set off a bomb. And he apparently has set more bombs, and we're about to see the conclusion of what he has wrought. My voice is the only one that works. That's a lie, we won't. Yeah, that's pretty much it. But yeah, we're about to finish it. Is everybody ready? Did everybody get your fucking snacks? Do you got a smoothie? You got some coffee? You got something to cuddle with? Everybody get your pets. Everybody get those cats. Everybody get your cat. Cuddle up with your cat. 2. Everybody ready? Sweet. We're about to jump in. Okay. Let me get some coffee real quick. Chapter 17, in which there is danger, disaster, and death. The detonation was that much closer and that much more violent, throwing Cabal and Marikal off their feet. The large windows on the starboard side of the salon exploded inwards, and suddenly the room was home to a howling gale and tumbling fragments of glass. The clouds outside seemed to buck backwards and forwards as the Princess Hortense yawned wildly. Miss Barrow and the other passengers were hurled from their seats. Lady Ninika sent sprawling over Colonel Constantine's body. Her screams mingled with the other cries of surprise and terror. "Cabal!" bellowed Marikal, climbing to his feet and standing with his legs well apart, braced against the rolling deck. "You're insane! You'll kill us all!" He looked around and caught sight of Cabal taking refuge behind a sofa. It was no sort of cover. Marikal aimed and fired, the heavy slug tearing clean through it. The lurching deck had spoiled his aim, however, and the bullet hole went through the Merc-Air antimacassar on the sofa top. "2 bullets left," called Cabal. "This is one of the many reasons you would make a bad ruler, Marikal. Poor resource management. Also, you show appallingly weak anticipatory skills." "Oh? And how would anybody guess that you would be mad enough to do this?" "Not this," said Cabal, his tone dismissive. "This." He leaned out suddenly. Marikal barely had time to register that Cabal had a gun in his hand before it fired. The swaying of the deck saved him, too, and the round going high and punching a hole in the aft window, and he ducked low and scuttled away. "You think a city as close to a bunch of rabid dogs as Perilla is to Mercarvia wouldn't have a good supply of gunsmiths?" Cabal called after the scampering noble. He weighed the gun in his hand. The man behind the counter had looked at him quizzically when he'd inquired whether they'd stocked the Webley 577 revolver. Thwarted, Cabal had settled on a Sensen revolver, but at least had the mild pleasure of finding one in an equally untidy caliber, 10.35 millimeter. His mind was unusually quite pristine, but oh, secret sin, he had always taken a perverse joy in dangling decimals. "The ship's going down and you two are having a gunfight?" shouted Herr Roborovsky. "You're both mad." "Sir, this may not be the best time for this," agreed Fräulein Satunin, grimly holding on to the carpet. Behind her, the ground was briefly glimpsed through the aft windows as the ship's tail dipped and swung. "Shut up!" spat Marikal, his black hair askew and his composure shattered from the end of the bar furthest from Cabal. "You, Satunin, you're supposed to be a trained killer. Get him!" "Sir," she replied forcefully, "he has a gun. I have a knife. He has cover. I have open ground. Worst of all, you've told me this in his hearing, what you wanted me to do. Tactically, this is a very unsound proposition, sir." "I don't give a flying fennec for your damned tactical propositions, you stupid bitch. Just kill him." "No, You're not listening to me, interrupted Roborovsky with urgent passion. We are all in dreadful danger. Nice attempt, sir, called Cabal from where he lay in moderate comfort behind the sofa. He was glad all the furniture was bolted down. With the Princess Hortense's current perturbations, he would have otherwise have been forced to chase his place of concealment around the salon. But the line guides provide only forward motion, not lift. As long as the gyroscopic levitators continue to spin, we will not crash. We will just drift. Shortly, the Senzen Air Force will come in pursuit of my stolen Entomopter, and they will find us. Oh, God, said Miss Barrow, and Cabal had a sudden intimation that he may have made a miscalculation. Cabal, the line guides are the ship's main source of power. Didn't you know that? It's in the pamphlet. Cabal twitched. Pamphlet? The one about the ship. The one you got with your travel documents and itinerary? Cabal thought of an origami swan and swallowed. Not so mythical now, eh, Cabal? Maricol started laughing, a coughing, barking laugh that contained little humor. She's right. Herr Roborovsky was hanging on a table support for dear life as the deck pitched violently beneath him. With two of them destroyed, there's barely enough to keep the levitators running. We need to land. We need to land immediately before the reserves are depleted. He was interrupted by a shuddering groan that jutted through the entire fabric of the vessel. It ran through their bodies and shook their hearts and their chests. Roborovsky swore something in a Markarvian dialect, a desperate and pleading jumble of words. It's the ship's spine. She's not going to be thrown around like this. If we don't set down soon, she'll break her back. But beneath them, there was nothing but forest and steep hillsides. Johannes Cabal was, though it pained him sorely to admit it, only human. And it is human to err. In his chosen profession, however, to err was to risk lynching, immolation, or ingestion. Cabal had so far kept his errors mainly on the small side. A singed eyebrow here, a deranged imp with a meat cleaver there, but overlooking the intimate connections between the etheric line guides and the gyroscopic levitators, was beginning to look like one of the more final variety. Furthermore, there was naught he could do about it while pinned down in the salon. While he and Maricol maintained their standoff, there was little chance of anybody getting out of there alive. He could bet that the crew members were too busy trying to restore him to the ship to bother him for the moment, but this was an imperfect state of affairs. They would either succeed, and then he would have a lot of angry Markarvians after him, or they would fail, and Cabal would finish his life and career cremated on some anonymous Senzen hillside. He considered his options. How much of a threat was Maricol? Assuming he had the same sort of revolver that Cabal had stolen from him back in Harsloss, it was a 6-chamber design, assuming further that he wasn't the cautious type and therefore carried a round under the hammer that left him with 2 rounds. Might he have reloaded? Possible, but unlikely. Given the softness of Cabal's cover, it would have been an obvious tactic to place 3 or 4 rounds in judiciously chosen points through the sofa, with a guarantee of at least 1 hit. Even if not fatal or debilitating, it would give him an advantage. That Maricol had not done so suggested that he had come out unprepared to shoot more than 6 peasants. Cabal had 5 rounds remaining, and was bitterly regretting not having brought some more with him. Like Maricol, however, he had not been anticipating a gunfight, so he had a small advantage, but time was wasting. He risked a peep along the side of the sofa, away from the bar, and saw Miss Barrow and the others clinging to the furniture. Not so long ago, he thought, I would have been safe on a train at this point. Harleman could have said what he liked, and I wouldn't have cared a fig. The ship pitched upwards amid shouts and screams. Everybody who could clung on for their lives. Unattended, Constantine rolled heavily back and up against the base of the bullet-damaged window in a half-sitting position. With a hollow musical tone, a long crack formed between the hole and the base of the window. It held for a second longer, then shattered, great shards of glass falling down to the treetops. Constantine lolled like a rag doll with nothing to support him and slipped backwards out of the window. Cabal watched the old soldier vanish and ground his teeth together. So, this is what a conscience does for one, is it? He'd had long enough. Precipitate action would kill him just as surely as indecision, but at least he would be doing something. He quickly analyzed his situation, recalled that almost everything aboard an aeroship is built to save weight, and decided that the wood panels of the bar could not be as substantial as they appeared to be. In the moment between the Princess Hortense swaying this way and that, he stood up and put 3 judiciously aimed bullets through the side of the bar. The scream of rage from behind it told him his gamble had paid off. Thus far, at least. Moving quickly towards the huddled group of passengers, he tried to get an angle on Count Marechal, a clear shot that would finish all this now. The wind roaring through the 2 broken windows whipped through his clothes and made his tie flutter like a black pennant as he strode forwards, gun aimed at the bar edge, waiting to see his target. He never heard the metallic hiss of the blade being drawn. There wasn't the faintest possibility that he ever could, in that maelstrom of sound and whirling newspaper sheets and napkins. He would have died there and then, but for Miss Barrow calling, "Cabal, behind you!" He didn't look at her first, which also saved his life. He simply turned immediately, gun leading, and found Fräulein Satunin standing beside him with a stiletto in her hand, the same blade she had used to kill Casson. It wasn't raised dramatically high. She was a killer, not an actress. But out to her right, blade pointing in, ready for her to step close behind Cabal and grab him with her free hand over his mouth or throat as the blade drove in just below the sternum and up into his heart. But even the coldest killer may balk a second when her target turns and she finds herself facing a gun barrel at mouth level. In that second, Lisbeth Satunin looked over the gun into Cabal's eyes, and in them she saw nothing at all. Cabal fired and turned away. Marechal, believing he was being shot at again, leaned out of his bullet-riddled cover and fired at Cabal. It was an impulsive shot, but still a narrow miss, and Cabal shied to his left, away from the path of the bullet. It was a sudden movement that caught him as much by surprise as it did Marechal, and took him clear past the end of the bar, leaving both him and the Count entirely without cover. Suddenly, it was no longer a gunfight. They faced each other, both armed and with heavy revolvers containing but a single round apiece, and in a shared thought that occurred to each man simultaneously, they realized that this was a duel. It was the same duel they had started with swords 3 days ago, and this was where it finally would end. Their guns barked a fraction of a second apart. Count Marechal was swift, but Cabal was sure. He lowered his gun as Lady Ninica threw herself wordlessly across her father's body. Cabal reached down and took Miss Barrow by the upper arm. "We should leave now," he said in a terse undertone. "No, Cabal, we can't. I can't." She was looking at the surviving passengers. Herr Roborovsky pushed back up against a chair, unable to look away from Satunin's body. Miss Ambersley, hands to her mouth, trapped in incomprehension. Lady Ninica, her dark lace cuffs darkened further by blood, as she held her father tightly. "What has happened?" she asked nobody in particular. "What has happened?" For his part, Marechal lay with his eyes open, and with the calmest expression Cabal had ever seen him wear, his brow now troubled only by a dark hole over a mite over 10.35 millimeters wide, the brain behind it forever stilled by the addition of 179 grains of lead. Cabal grimaced. "They can look out for themselves. Come on, every second wasted narrows our chances." It seemed unnecessary to expound upon the fact that their chances were already as narrow as the leg of an emaciated giraffe. Miss Barrow was having none of it. She shook off his hand. "Why did you come back?" she demanded through taut lips. "It wasn't for you, if that's what you're thinking. Are you coming or not?" They glared at each other. Coming to a decision, she turned to the others. "If we stay here, we'll die. Come on." Two of them looked over at her with eyes like hunted animals, but Lady Ninika's hunt was over. Her eyes were as glassy as a vixen's in a museum. "Daddy," she said with a faint certainty, "Daddy will make everything all right." She hugged Maricol's corpse more tightly yet, a still point in a shattering world. Miss Ambersley moved to follow her, but Miss Barrows stopped her. "I have to go to her," said Miss Ambersley. "I have a duty." "Your duty is discharged. She has made her choice. Come with us." Miss Ambersley started to protest, but paused, looking regretfully at Lady Ninika. "Ophelia," she said querulously. Her voice was lost in the winds that were singing over the edges of broken glass. Then, more firmly, "Ophelia, you must come with me. Come at once." Lady Ninika did not respond at all. She simply held her father and stared into nothingness. "It would be kinder to leave her here," said Cabal, noting that just for once it was possible for the best course of action also to be the most convenient. "Such a willful girl," Miss Ambersley said in an undertone. Then to Miss Barrow, "Very well, I shall go with you two." She turned to Herr Roborowski. "Sir, you must come too." He shook his head. "This is all my fault. It was my idea to disguise the ship. I never expected all this to happen, I swear." The words tumbled out of him, thick with despair. "Daguerre, he was a great man, a hero to me. I had no idea what they would do to him. It was barbaric, and it's all my fault." "That's settled then," said Cabal. "Can we go now?" Miss Barrow waved him to silence, much to his irritation. "Herr Roborowski, can you fly an anemopter?" This unexpected question confused him out of his desolation. "What? Yes, I can." Cabal understood immediately. "Ideal. Both Maricol's machine and the trainer I stole are two-seaters. His isn't as damaged as I suggested. I just said that to aggravate him. 2 pilots, 2 passengers. This should work. We just need to get to the flight deck before impact." Ascending to the flight deck was both easier and harder to achieve than expected. Cabal had come down from there to the first-class deck via an access spiral stairwell that ran through all the decks. The doors from the circular well to each deck were secured by a door that opened easily going from the well to the deck, but which required a key to enter from all the passenger decks. Cabal had taken a minute to disable the lock when exiting the stairwell, and this foresight saved them a lot of time. The actual ascent, however, was accomplished in a claustrophobic metal tube standing several stories high that was swinging violently, the bulkhead lights flickering on and off, sometimes leaving them in darkness for minutes at a time. Miss Ambersley faltered once, telling them to go on without her, but a remark from Cabal on the ephemeral nature of British pluck caused her to suddenly start climbing again in a stony, uncomplaining silence. Miss Barrow was going to congratulate Cabal on his grasp of psychology when she realized that he'd meant it. At least they had not had to contend with crewmen running from deck to deck. The men were already at their emergency stations, and it would take a direct order from a superior to make them leave. Besides, even though most probable knew the ship was doomed, there was nowhere to run. Mercarvia subscribed to the view that providing parachutes would only encourage indiscipline, and the giving up of the ship when the situation was not yet irrevocable. Even from experienced crew weighed less on the balance sheet than a combat aeroship. It was a relief to reach the small room at the top of the stairwell. In its narrow confines, bad weather gear swung on coat hooks and equipment clanged heavily against the inside of wall-mounted lockers. On one side, a shallow metal staircase rose upwards, where twin doors were set into the ceiling. Cabal climbed quickly up to them and undogged the handles before pushing upwards hard. The doors swung open and clanged down onto the flight deck, revealing a great blue rectangle of sky above. The little party climbed out into a howling gale. The crew had managed to stabilize the Princess Hortense's wild pitching and yawing, but the levitators were barely keeping the ship airborne. A crash landing on the forested slopes, with who knew what exposed boulders and rocky outcrops beneath, would be like driving a frigate onto a reef. She was a strong ship, but she had never been designed to suffer that sort of punishment. The only alternative was to run her for the Cadamenian border in a headlong rush, hoping to clear the forest and put her down in a pasturelands beyond. Without full power, however, she was caught in a slow, blundering onward wallow. The Hortense was drawing to disaster as surely as any storm-torn galleon caught with a rocky coast to leeward. The view was magnificent, if terrifying. They had left the last few clouds behind them in the charge for the border, and the ship was lumbering through clear skies. The horizon seemed to be as high as the ship, as if the world were a great shallow bowl. Miss Barrow put this down to an optical illusion and guessed that they were actually still several hundred feet up. This also turned out to be an illusion, punctured by the appearance of a hilltop whose jagged crown was definitely above them, gliding past on the starboard side. Roborovsky was full of action, given new impetus by responsibility and perhaps the chance for some redemption, at least in his own eyes. He had been shepherding Miss Ambersley along as if she were a favored aunt, checking that she was all right and giving her assurances that he would get her out of there alive. Now, in the access room, he was able to show his special knowledge of the functions of a military ship. He opened an equipment locker and pulled out a pair of binoculars that he used to look along the length of the flight deck to where the two entomopters stood. "They look serviceable," he said. "Herr Meisner, did you remember to apply the parking brakes?" Cabal, who liked things to be tidy, replied tartly that yes, of course he had. Thus reassured, Roborovsky opened a cupboard set flush into the access room's wall. Inside was something like a railway signal lever, a great thing with a grip release at the end of the handle, and a great bolt at the hinge. He took the handle, squeezed the grip release closed, and then threw himself back. Vibrant twanging sounds as of cables under tension sounded through the wall. "What are you doing?" asked Miss Barrow, but the diminutive Herr Roborovsky was putting too much effort into it to be able to answer. "I assume this is something important," said Cabal, stepping past her and lending his strength too. The lever was dragged back, complaining in strident metallic clicks all the way and locked into position. Roborovsky took a moment to recover his breath. He wheezed a couple of times and tried again. "It's the arrestor line lever. They should be back flush with the deck now. Shouldn't get in the way." Cabal climbed halfway up the steps and struck his head down out the hatch. The arrestor cables had indeed been withdrawn into long slots running across the runway. "Won't we need to bring the entomopters around so they can have a run-up?" asked Miss Barrow. "Not necessary," said Roborovsky. "They can take off vertically if need be. They have lifting surfaces at the base of the wing stubs and the underside of the fairing, so they do fly better at speed, but they don't need to get speed up for takeoff." "Oh," said Miss Barrow, uncomfortable with the depth of ignorance that would have been spared her if she'd only read more boys' comics. "Why all the business with the arrestor lines, then?" "Taking off is easy, Fraulein. Landing, well, imagine it. You might be approaching a rocking ship in high winds, driving rain, and possibly under ground fire," he said, nodding sincerely. "You need the biggest landing area you can get, and you won't be coming in slow and easy. The arrestor lines mean that you just have to set your machine down without worrying about going over the edge." Cabal had turned to listen, but now sat heavily on the step. "Fuel," he said. "The trainer's almost dry. How long will it take to refuel it?" Roborovsky put his hand to his mouth. "With a deck crew, 5 minutes. With just us, double that. You even used your reserve?" "Reserve? Secondary tank. You switch over to it when you run low." He took Cabal's blank expression as good news. "Don't worry," he said, slapping Cabal on the arm. "I'm sure you would have found out about it on your second lesson." They climbed up the steps and up onto the flat top, linking arms for mutual support, as much for safety. They had to almost close their eyes as the wind tore the moisture from their skin and bared teeth. It took almost 3 minutes to walk the length of the deck, and all were glad to take some respite from the gale behind the waiting entomopters. Roborovsky climbed up on the side of the trainer and checked inside the cockpit. He climbed down again, holding a flying helmet he'd lifted from the seat. "I'll take the Symphony," he bellowed into Cabal's ear. "The reserve's full. We should make Perilla without any problems." "Perilla?" shouted Miss Barrow, huddling against the cold. "Yes," he replied. "I don't want to go to Catamenia, and I don't think I want to go back to Markarvia either. There's nothing there for me anymore. I'll ask for political asylum. With what I can tell them, they'll grant it." "Isn't that treason?" asked Miss Ambersley, her reedy voice almost lost on the wind. "My country, right or wrong," Roborovsky shook his head. "They killed my country when they killed Daguerre for the sake of convenience. They killed it when poor old Constantine was put down like a dog for saying what was right. I'll go home one of these days, but not while it's being run by butchers like Maricol and the crooks that backed him." He gave Miss Ambersley his hand and helped her onto the inset rungs on the side of the Animopter's fuselage. "Come along, ma'am. We're leaving." Miss Ambersley was commendably prompt under the circumstances, not even showing an unhelpful demureness in the face of the wind whirling her skirts around and the necessary loss of dignity imposed by clambering into a cockpit. Once he was assured that she was getting along perfectly well without assistance, Roborovsky climbed up into the aft cockpit of the tandem arrangement. He was just strapping himself in when Cabal appeared at the cockpit edge. "Herr Roborovsky, when you reach Perilla, I would be obliged if—" "I don't know any Johannes Cabal," said Roborovsky. He smiled. "I've never heard of the man, and I'm sure Miss Ambersley hasn't either." Cabal said nothing more, but nodded once in thanks and farewell before climbing down again. "You'd better get clear," Roborovsky shouted to Cabal and Miss Barrow. "You don't want a love tap from the wings when they start up." They moved back as the starter banged and the engine turned over. It was still warm from its previous flight and caught immediately, growing to an eager snarl to be off, which became a crescendo of engineered fury as Roborovsky opened the throttle. He shouted something to Miss Ambersley, who plainly didn't catch it. It was almost certainly something along the lines of, "Brace yourself," because in a moment the Animopter flung itself off the front of the flight deck and dropped like a cannonball from a leaning tower, immediately vanishing from sight. "I wonder if you had enough altitude to do that," said Cabal into Miss Barrow's ear in a tone of mild scientific interest. It wasn't even a question, simply a remark, despite which it was promptly answered by the sight of the Symphony dashing up ahead of them in a steep climb before banking to port and sweeping by at speed on a reciprocal of the Princess Hortense's course. Cabal climbed up to the rungs on the side of Maricol's Animopter. It was a very different machine from the Symphony trainer, and he was already regretting being left with it. Where the Symphony was designed to be friendly and forgiving, this one was lean and antagonistic. It had brackets on its side panels that were probably intended to act as gun mounts, and the root of weapon-bearing wings. Its livery was a matte camouflage green, with a discreet Maricol crest painted on the fuselage below the edge of the pilot's cockpit. Cabal assumed it was a fighter that had been stripped down for a reconnaissance role, landing it to the range and speed to travel undetected over Senza. By flying low over the treetops and staying away from populated areas, it was unlikely to be spotted from the land or the air. Also, unlike the Symphony, the cockpits were fully enclosed, with the aft pilot's position set higher than the co-pilot's. He found a catch and tried to unfasten it. It proved recalcitrant, and he barked his knuckles sharply on it, drawing blood and expletives. "We do not have time for this," he muttered, trying to free the catch. He had momentarily feared that it was somehow locked, but now saw that it was just awkward by accident rather than design. "Come on, Cabal," shouted Miss Barrow. "We don't have time for this." He favored her with an old-fashioned look and went back to wrestling with the mechanism. He had a further worry, one that he decided not to mention to her, as then she would become all recriminatory, and the explanation, combined with the inevitable theatrics, would eat into the very time that they both knew they didn't have. As soon as the phrase third bomb passed his lips, he knew she'd be impossible, so he kept that little piece of intelligence quiet and congratulated himself on a wise calculation. As is often the way with self-congratulation, it proved premature, unlike the bomb, which was grotesquely tardy. The intention, back in those happy halcyon days when Cabal still believed that the levitators were in no way dependent upon the etheric line guides, had been to destroy 3 of the 4 guides. Destroying all 4 would have been more thorough, as well as more aesthetically pleasing, but he had insufficient materials with which to engineer a 4th device. The plan had been for one to go off first, to distract the crew and give him some bargaining time should it be necessary. Then, the 2nd and 3rd bombs had been due to detonate within a minute or so of each other, crippling both starboard line guides so that the ship would have been capable of only a slow, clockwise circle, trapping it within the Sensen frontier. He had been displeased that only one device had detonated, but not too concerned until the flaw in his plan, vis-a-vis plunging out of the sky and everybody dying, had been exposed. Since then, he had been hoping that some flaw in the reagents had rendered the 3rd bomb entirely ineffective. The alternative, that he had made an error in its construction, had not occurred to him at all, rather than just slow. Hope, in the same manner as self-congratulation, all too often invites a good crushing. The 3rd bomb was mounted in No. 2 etheric line guide at the ship's forward starboard quarter. This was also, incidentally, the line guide they were closest to. The explosive force was not great. It was not required to be, but it was loud, flamboyant, and unexpected even by its creator. Miss Barrel leapt sideways onto the deck with a scream of surprise, and so was in a good position to reach into one of the grooves running laterally across the deck and hang on to the arrestor cable that lay there. This was to prove advantageous when the ship dipped its prow 30 degrees. 30 degrees does not seem a great deal when drawn on paper during a geometry lesson. When hanging on to the side of an entomopter, the deck angles down by such an amount, and the entomopter, brakes or no, starts to slide forward. It seems a very great deal indeed. Cabal looked down and saw the entomopter's wheels squeeing urgently across the rubberized surface, leaving white burrs as the machine slid sideways toward the deck edge. He ran rapidly through the various options. If he lost the entomopter, he would lose the only way off the Princess Hortense before she belly-flopped into the forest. To use the entomopter, he needed to open the cockpit. The cockpit canopy was being difficult. Once inside, he needed to start the engine and bring the wings up to an operational speed before the entomopter fell, or very shortly after it started to fall. He was not familiar with the cockpit layout. The canopy was still being difficult. He was running out of deck to scrape across. The verdamp cockpit canopy was still... It opened suddenly under his hand, just as he felt the machine angle up under him as it started to topple off the edge. He had no choice. He threw himself backwards and twisted partially in the air to land on his side. He flattened his hands across the deck surface in an attempt to stop sliding off himself as the entomopter flipped over the edge and plunged into the tree tops 100 meters below. He was only partially successful. He wasn't moving as rapidly as the entomopter had, but he was still sliding relentlessly towards the edge. He saw Miss Barrow some 10 feet away, hanging on for her life with one hand. Her expression was fearful but determined, and astonishingly, her free hand was reaching out towards Cabal, as if somehow she would extend her grasp beyond the length of her arm by pure force of will. It was a hopeless endeavor, but Cabal appreciated the sentiment. He raised his eyebrows at her in a hey-ho, here we go again sort of way, as if plummeting from aeroships was something he did as a hobby. Somebody at the helm presumably didn't appreciate the idea of the Princess Hortense plowing into the forest quite so soon, either. Finding power from somewhere in the ship's dwindling resources, her prow was brought up vigorously, while Miss Barrow held on to her cable despite being hurled vertically as if performing a one-handed stand. Cabal was flipped into the air like an especially sociopathic pancake, only to crumble heavily onto the deck a moment later, driving the breath from him in an explosive exhalation. He did not rise or react, but simply lay there on his back, his arms slowly moving from the elbow. Miss Barrow feared that he might have been knocked unconscious, and half rising to walk in a crouch, her fingertips low in case the deck moved again, she went to him. "Cabal! Cabal, are you all right?" She saw that his eyes were open and he was looking straight up. He spoke quietly, and she half made out what he said and managed to half translate that from what little German she knew. From the quarter sense she thus derived, she made an educated guess that he was commenting on how blue the sky was and how pretty. When Cabal touched upon the purely aesthetic, it was time for extreme measures. A few stinging slaps later, and he was more or less composed. "Did I say anything?" he muttered, sweeping his hair back in a distracted fashion. She considered Cabal's fiercely guarded dignity, and that it would be kind for her to preserve it. Then again, "You were raving about how pretty and blue the sky was." Then she willfully added, "I think you also said something about gathering flowers and dancing." Cabal's eyebrows rose in a baffled astonishment before lowering again into a suspicious stare. "I'm sure I didn't," he said, albeit not quite as self-assuredly as usual. He climbed to his feet and walked away from the ship's leading edge in a crouch. Being quite that close to imminent extinction had lost its allure. "Now what shall we do?" asked Miss Barrow as he walked by her. He stopped and considered. They had only a few more minutes of flying time left before the inevitable crash, and every plan he could think of required more time, more materials, and a great deal more altitude. Meanwhile, the ship was performing the wide clockwise circle he had predicted, which was currently bringing it into the mouth of a wide tree-lined valley. Through the trees, he could make out rocky escarpments that, while very scenic, boded ill for a painless crash landing. He drew in his attention closer to the ship itself. 3 of the line guides were blackened and smoking from the impromptu bombs he had planted inside convenient maintenance hatches. The devices had been small, merely intended to damage a few components and cripple the line guide. Instead, the great louvered casings were smoke-blackened and buckled. He knew the strength of the explosive mixture he had used, and there was no earthly way he had miscalculated to this degree. It was possible, number one, it was likely that there was something inside the guides, probably some sort of coolant or oil reserve that had proved unexpectedly excitable when blown up. The guide at the ship's starboard quarter had detonated so spectacularly that its pylon was bent, the guide itself waggling slowly back and forth in the slipstream, a few feet like the tail of an uncertain dog creaking ominously. Cabal looked at it and made a decision. It wasn't much of a plan, but assuming the rest of the ship carried the same flammable fluid, then staying where they were and hoping for the best seemed even less likely as a strategy for survival. "Follow me," he ordered Miss Barrow peremptorily, and set off for the line guide. "Where are we going?" she asked, carrying her shoes as she ran beside him. "That thing," replied Cabal with a nod of his head. "It will probably come off as soon as we hit the valley wall. The plan, if I can dignify it as so, is that we climb onto it and hang on. With a little luck, I misspeak, with a great deal of luck, it will take the majority of the impact to tear loose and get us down to the ground relatively unscathed, provided the impetuous doesn't throw us off and dash us against the ground just before the line guide rolls over us. As you can see, the aft guide on this side is mounted closer to the hull, so at least we shall fall outside its path and won't have to worry about being crushed into paste by it." Miss Barrow's pace faltered. "It's one less thing to worry about," he offered. "This is your plan?" "The alternative is to stay aboard when the ship crashes and probably burst into flames. between the crew and all the vegetables aboard, I imagine the smell will be something akin to bacon pie. They had reached the base of the pylon. So, Miss Sparrow recapped, we can either die suddenly on that thing or be burnt to death if we stay here. Is that it? Yes. With a footling chance of survival if we go to the former route. Miss Barrow grimaced, hitched up her skirt, and tested one foot on the base of the pylon. Cabal, if we should live through this, please, promise me. She stepped forward, falling to all fours as she did so to grab the pylon edges. Yes? Promise me that you'll never become a motivational speaker. And so saying, she crawled rapidly across the pylon in a few sharp, deliberate movements, her concentration completely on the metal beneath her and pointedly not on the 100 yards or so beneath it. All that separated them from perdition. Their treetops ran by in a blur of hard greens variegated with black shadow, or the lack of distinction in their peripheral vision, giving the impression of a great sea waiting to drown them. She reached the other side and used the louvered vents to hold on to as she climbed up onto the line guide's top, getting covered in carbon black in the process. Once she was more or less secure, she turned to see if Cabal was following. He was, and exhibiting no sign of enjoying the experience. Down on all fours and with a face like a wrath of Jove, he crept slowly forwards onto the pylon, his gaze focused entirely upon it. Miss Barrow made one half-hearted and unconvincing attempt at saying something encouraging, but Cabal shot her a testy glance that she decided to leave him to it. He was about a third of the way across when his unreliable luck failed him once again. Somewhere in the laboring innards of the Princess Hortense, a tortured relay finally overloaded and failed in a spray of sparks to a chorus of swearing engineers. 3 gyroscopic levitators in the 4 starboard array died, their constant reassuring hums diminished al niente. Like a puppet with a string cut, the corner of the aeroship where Miss Barrow clung and Cabal crawled dipped sharply. Anyone who has ever ridden quickly over a humpback bridge or experienced the first descent of a roller coaster will know the sudden sense of falling while the stomach seems to carry on rising. It is a thrilling sensation when enjoyed in safety, but as this was not the case with Cabal at the moment, the sudden horrid sense of helplessness created by the pylons moving quickly away from him, momentarily causing him to fall, made him cry out. The pylons stopped, even swung up a little, and Cabal smashed heavily into it and rolled off the edge. For the second time in his life, he found himself dangling by one hand from an aeroship. Miss Barrow was shouting, no, screaming at him, telling him to hang on, to pull himself up, to do all of the obvious things that he intended to do anyway, if only he could. He looked down and was surprised to see the treetops so close below. He wondered briefly if a fall would be survivable, but then saw in a gap amongst the trees how tall they stood and decided against it. Then he realized that Miss Barrow was screaming about a tree too. He was just thinking what a coincidence it was that they were both so concerned with trees when the particular specimen Miss Barrow was talking about, a monarch of the forest growing well above its neighbors, struck. There was the great sound of glass smashing to the treetop, dealt the starboard flying bridge position a fearsome blow. A moment later, it hit the pylon. Cabal heard the collision at the same time that he felt it, the tree smashing into the pylon halfway along its length. Suddenly, he swung forwards to bang harshly against the pylon's underside as a mass of pine fronds whipped against his back. The Hortense, massive and imperturbable, was not to be slowed down by such a thing, and was in the process of shearing off as much of the treetop as possible and bending back the rest. It was not a one-way act of destruction, however. Cabal grabbed a second handhold and hugged himself as close to the ship's hull as he could, as the tree tore away from the pylon skin and much of the girder work beneath it. Miss Barrow cried out in terror as the line guide sagged on the pylon tip and lurched backwards on the ruined pivoting mechanism that connected it to the pylon. With a loud crack, the tree was behind them, leaving only shredded fronds hanging from the ripped metal and a pleasantly fresh scent. A rapidly diminishing series of crashes sounded as the trunk scraped along the starboard promenade, shattering every surviving pane of glass as it went. The collision had done Cabal a little good. Where before he had been able to reach nothing but smooth steel, snapped and bent girders now jutted out of the pylon just behind him. He tested one before trusting his weight to it, pushed his foot into the bend at the torn end, and slid back towards the upper surface in relative safety. Miss Barrow, fingers driven deep into the line guide's uppermost louvered slot, was surprised to see him emerge, and then even more surprised to feel relief. She watched him heave himself onto the pylon top and roll back onto the deck edge. He lay there, breathing heavily and watching the sky for several long seconds as he recovered his strength and his composure. "Cabal," she called. "Cabal, are you all right?" He turned his head to look at her. "Never been better," he said, too exhausted to put even a whit of the sarcasm he would usually have employed into it. "Give me a moment to catch my breath, and I'll join you." "Yes, about that. I was thinking, actually, maybe if I came back..." Something bent and snapped in the line guide's swiveled mount, making it swing and tilt by a few more degrees from the horizontal. Miss Barrow suppressed a cry and tightened her grip until the metal edges dug painfully into her fingers. "It's just... I don't think I feel very safe over here." "You shouldn't feel safe anywhere aboard," replied Cabal, truthfully if undiplomatically. "Stay where you are." "I think it's going to fall off," she said in a very careful and moderated tone, as if the line guide might hear her and fall off in spite. "That is the idea," said Cabal. He got painfully to his feet, grunting at his sprains and bruises. "It will come off easily on impact, not before. It is our best chance to survive this. Stay where you are, and..." He paused as he glanced forward. "Ach, Scheiße!" he snapped. With seconds to spare, he glanced at the shattered pylon with the line guide wagging slowly at its tip and decided he would never make it in time. Instead, he ran forwards onto the landing strip and threw himself full length at the nearest arrestor cable slot. He hooked his fingers around the cable, pressed his face against the deck, and hoped for the best. The rocky outcrop Cabal had seen jutting proudly out of the hillside like a glacier awaiting the next unsinkable ship smashed into the forward dining room windows and tore through the structure, rupturing the next deck up. The sound of the smash of rock, metal, and glass meeting in a cacophonic orgy was visceral in its force. Cabal gripped the arrestor cable with the fierce determination of a man who knows that there is no second chance. His head was jerked down as his body snapped straight behind him, and for long, long seconds the roar of destruction and the black rubberized decking were his entire world. Gushing coolant, hydraulic fluid, and root vegetables from her dreadful wound like a gut-shot hemophiliac, the Princess Hortense crashed downwards, spearing her belly on the great trees in that rarely traveled deep forest. But her momentum was massive, and she tore trees up by the roots in her headlong charge down the hillside. Those that wouldn't be uprooted were ripped to twain. Miss Barrow had followed Cabal's glance and was already securing her grip on the line guide housing as he'd run for the landing strip. She saw Cabal hang on for his life and just momentarily thought he glanced up at her, but then she had to put her face down against the metal of the line guide and brace herself. She closed her eyes, cherishing and fearing every second to come. The incredible roar of destruction battered her, the dreadful tones of disintegration buffeting through her like a fierce, endless beat upon a bass drum, the resonations pouring through her, making her stomach and her heart feel as if they would explode in sympathetic vibration, and that she would welcome such a rapid release. Beside her, the aeroship lost its first and last battle fought against an implacable and invincible foe. The Princess Hortense died, screaming her last, as the earth itself tore out her guts and smeared them across the hillside. When it suddenly became quieter, Leonie Barrow assumed she had been fatally injured, life and senses ebbing from her. She couldn't bring herself to lift her head for the longest time, afraid of what she might see, but even fear can be defeated by curiosity, or, failing that, boredom, and she looked. Almost a mile ahead of her, the Hortense was still sliding, but slowly, so slowly. She would smash into a tree and start to roll it up until her immense weight cracked the trunk and the ship lurched on again with small shreds of rediscovered momentum until she struck the next. She was alight, angry orange flames boiling out from her rolling circular clouds of evil black smoke that moiled and hovered in the air like the devil's fingerprints. Amidst the smoke, Miss Barrow thought she once saw the figure of a man standing at the forward edge of the flight deck, black jacket fluttering about him, but then the black clouds closed around him, and she wasn't sure she had seen anybody there at all. Then the aeroship hit several trees simultaneously, and this time they bent but did not break. The ship lay still and burned. Leonie Barrow stood atop the shattered remains of the line guide, lying where a tree had interceded between the hull and the guide itself, and neatly bisected the supporting pylon. She stood and she watched the ship burn. She chose to ignore the bodies she could see scattered along the path of the crushed trees, bark and branches stripped upward by the passage of the aeroship over them. She was still standing there an hour later when a flight of Sensen combat entomopters flew overhead and started circling. One sighted her and flew low, dropping the pilot's pack of survival supplies by her with a hastily scribbled note that the terrain was too difficult for the fighters to land, but that help was on its way. Miss Barrow did not react, even when the rescue mission arrived. They could get little sense from her, but this was only to be expected. A wreck is a traumatic event. An air wreck doubly so. She was drugged and removed from the site of such carnage and flown back to Perilla in the company of the doctors while the search for other survivors continued. But they found only corpses. Miss Leonie Barrow, a British national, was the only known survivor of the catastrophe. In the 2 days of bed rest she had before her doctors declared that she could be questioned for short periods, the investigators at the crash site had already begun to have grave suspicions that the Princess Hortense was not what she appeared to be. Sensen mechanics and engineers would not be fooled as customs officers might be. They studied the line guides and the levitators and found them to be of military grade. They examined the aeroship's skeleton, exposed by collision and fire, and noted the concealed frames and hard points where armor could be welded and weapons mounted. So when Miss Barrow told them of Maricol's subterfuge, it came as no great surprise to them. When she told them of his death, it came as no great sorrow. They had found Maricol's remains. Body was altogether too composed a description, and tentatively made an identification based on clothing and artifacts. It was good to have his unexpected presence and death confirmed. Now all they required was an explanation. Some useful data had come from the man Robrovsky, but when it was realized how deeply he was involved in the Mercarvian armament program, he was spirited away by Sensen intelligence, and the crash investigation saw no more of him. The Ambersley woman had been even less helpful, saying that she wasn't interested in local politics, crossing her arms and demanding to be taken to the British consulate in increasingly strident terms until the investigators acquiesced for no better reason than to be rid of her. This left Miss Barrow, and even when she was evasive, pleading that the shock had affected her memory, she asked to see a list of casualties, which they were reluctant to give her at first, until she suggested that it might help her recall. It turned out to be a very short list. The Princess Hortense had burned fiercely and consumed flesh and bone. Maricol, whose body had fallen from the ruined salon windows before the conflagration and been left in the ship's shattered wake, was one of the few that they had been more or less sure of. Miss Barrow read the few names and the short physical descriptions and effects of those still unidentified, and she bit her lip. "He may still be alive," she said quietly to herself. Not quite quietly enough to escape the attention of the police officer assigned to her, a chit of a girl barely out of the academy, but who burned with an intelligence and perceptivity that would either see her to the top of the force or resigned within a year. "Alive, signorina?" she prompted. "Who may be alive?" Miss Barrow started and then relaxed. It would be a relief to tell somebody, she realized. The only consideration was how much to tell. "It's time," she began slowly. "It's time to tell you what happened. Time for you to know. I think I've put it all together properly in my mind now." The officer had already produced her notebook and flipped it open. She sat, pencil hovering and eyes intent upon her charge. Miss Barrow hesitated a moment longer, unsure if she was being wise. Then, trusting to fate and judgment, she began. "There's a man central to all this. He may still be alive. You have to find him. Dead or alive, you have to find him." And with Officer Fresca's shorthand flowing, Leonie Barrow told her story. Through the forest, he walked alone. His jacket still stank of smoke, and it reminded him of another time, not so long ago, when he had been walking home smelling much the same, albeit with a more sulphurous note to it. He hoped this wasn't going to be a reoccurring feature of his life. His escape from the stricken Princess Hortense had been so pathetically simple that he felt faintly ashamed that he had placed Miss Barrow on the line guide. She was probably dead now, he thought, and that was his fault. His conscience prickled him, and for once he did not chide it into silence. To be fair to himself, he had thought the aeroship would explode on impact, but instead it had burned, and that had given him time. Time as the ship ground along the hillside at little more than a fast walking pace to take up station at the end of the pylon at the shattered tip where once Miss Barrow's line guide had been. Time to wait for a likely tree bow to approach, and time to grab it as it passed. That part of the operation had been no more difficult than boarding an escalator or a paternoster. Descending the tree after all of its branches beneath him had been torn away by the passage of the aeroship proved more exercising. He had finally managed it by going back to the trunk and clambering gracefully around to the undamaged side of the tree before making an elegant descent that left him sweaty, swearing, and bruised. Once on the ground, he contemplated going in search of the missing line guide to check whether Miss Barrow had survived, but the arrival of a flight of sens and anemopters had dissuaded him. By the time he worked his way back up the hillside, he decided rescuers would be arriving in force, and he had no desire to answer their questions. Besides, if she was dead, she was dead. That didn't put her beyond his particular brand of help, but he doubted that she would appreciate anything he could do for her. Well then, her fate was her fate, and his was his. His looked as if it would involve a lot of walking. Through the towering trees, dismayed by the wildlife, by his very presence, and never pausing to apologize, went a pale man. Johannes Cabal was walking home. An afterword of sorts. On the subject of Cabal's journey home, some commentators have inquired about whether anything noteworthy occurred en route, to which the author has replied that there is very little to concern oneself with on that subject. The journey was uneventful in all respects, unless one counts the business with the spy and the bandits and the elemental evil and the end of the world as we know it. So no, nothing one might call noteworthy. "Ah," said the commentators, who plainly don't know when to leave well enough alone, "some people might like to hear about spies and bandits and all that." This, the author grudgingly admits, is a fair point. If, therefore, you are a person of such low appetites, here follows an account of a further adventure of Johannes Cabal. Read it or ignore it as you are minded. And then there's the stinger, which is called The Tomb of Umtak Ktharl, which we're going to take a little break. This would normally be Denki's time to have the floor to complain about whatever they see fit to complain about for that week. But, when they've already complained considerably to me about many things, and their sister is here, so they're not going to do it this week. But that's technically the end of the book. Unless, of course, you want to hear about the end of the world, which you might. He also threatened to poison his constituents, so... I mean, what do you expect? It's Howard. Yeah. Umtak Ktharl is a good one. I enjoyed it, but it's also written from the perspective of a casually racist, like, British spy. So if you want to hear it, you can. If you don't want to, it's fine. You can choose. You sure you didn't write this under a pen name? I'm absolutely 100% positive that I did not do that. No, I didn't write it. I can't take credit for that. Jonathan Howard will poison me. We could absolutely read it. There is a little bit of casual racism. I'm just going to warn you. Like, it's not like overtly, but it's, it's like from the perspective of like a different guy. It's not Johannes. Johannes is in it, but it's written from this other guy's perspective that just happens to pass him by in the forest. And he calls an Asian man an Oriental. So I'll just spoil that little bit for you. And I was like, the first time I read it, I was like, well, that's in bad taste. Yeah. No, you know how, like, it's not like, people shouldn't have rights, but it's just a little bit of name calling where you're like, oh, well, you're still a shithead. Congratulations. But they're also British. So do with that what you will. Yeah. And it's written from his perspective, so we can read it if you'd like. I'm going to take this. It's so hot in here. Why is it so hot in here? I'm never like this warm. It's really annoying. Is this an Antifa shirt? No. Don't cancel me. Also, don't get me banned. Yeah, but normally I'm cold. Normally I'm like a cold person. This is not, it's not cold in here. I'm like low-key considering cracking open a window. Yeah, I don't know why it's so hot in here today. We don't have the heat on, to my knowledge. Pretty sure we turned that shit off. So, how's everybody feeling? Are you enjoying it? Or did you enjoy it? Seeing as that was technically the end. What do you think? Second book's a little different from the first, and the third is a little different from the first and the second. Each one sort of has their own different genre. It's like he wanted to write the same character, but put them in several different genres worth of a story. So, you love it? Can you not hear me? Do I need to turn this up? What's going on? Is my sound bad? Is my sound good? Do I need to adjust my settings in some manner? Wi-Fi just kicked in and kicked. Yeah, the second is not everybody's favorite. I liked it decently enough, but it's not my favorite either. The third one is my favorite. You kept losing signal. Ah, yeah, my mom has called me like a few times now, and I don't know what's going on, but it's silent in my phone, but I can see the notifications up top. I'm not a fan. I don't know why she's calling me. There's no reason why she shouldn't. I just left. I'm not supposed to see her again for another 2 months. We have a schedule. She keeps contacting me outside the schedule. Froze while he's on the edge. No. Everyone's shit was freezing? Aw. I'm starting to wonder if it's me. It didn't say there was a disruption in the live on my end. Like, it didn't say there was any technical problems. Normally it tells you and the little light changes up here. When it's good, it's green. That's why I periodically look up to just make sure it's still green. We're in the same house. I hate that. When people like text you from the next room. The only exception is when I'm like, I need some alone time, and then instead of just barging in the room, they'll like text me and be like, hey, can I come in? And then it's okay, but I hate it when people just call me and they're in the same house. All was good on your end. Okay, good. I was like, did everybody have technical issues? Should we not? Maybe today is cursed. Let's not say that. It's not. Today is fine. We're all going to be fine. Everybody's having fun. Nobody's cursed. That's how we get cursed, is by mentioning the curse. The lives are all cursed. Wait until the next book. You thought it was bad in like chapter 6 of the first book, where I had to say all the Eldritch gods' names in quick succession. The third book has one god called out specifically several times, and I'm anticipating like every single time I say it, there's going to be like Wi-Fi disruptions, and I'm really going to lose it. Oh yeah, multiple times. The same god over and over and over and over and over again. So that's not great. We may have a lot of problems the next book. I'm just anticipating it. So strap in, everybody. We're gonna have a fun time. I'm gonna open a window. Sorry, Dinky's sister was like really loud there for a second. Love that. Please warn us before that chapter so I can prepare the wards. There isn't just one chapter, Jen, is what I'm telling you. It's the entire book has that god integral to the plot. They mention his name multiple times. So there's not any one. I'm pretty sure the first time they say it, though, is chapter 3 or 4. I'll have to check. So our second session, maybe just go ahead and then just keep refreshing it, because it's going to be every week we say it at least once. Yeah, it's going to be all through the book, is what I'm saying, is that we're going to have a lot of technical issues next book. I love this series, my favorite series. That's why I chose this one as the first. So yeah, hopefully the third book goes okay, but we don't know for sure, because there's going to be a lot of just this one god called over and over and over and over again. We'll see. Gonna have a fun time. I'm gonna open a window. Hold on. I want to see if I can do this without taking my mic off. I'm gonna... Oof. Okay. Open the window. Yeah, it's just a fun series. I reread it like every so often, but I've reread it at least 10 times. It's my favorite series. By the way, is Emmy in here? Emmy. You in here? Sound off? Is Emmy here? I don't know. We're not for sure on that. I don't know if they're in here. Emmy's in here. I wanted to thank you because I got my card and I wanted to let you know. Yay! Okay, good. Okay, there we go. It just updated. Yay! Thank you, Cruisin'. It didn't update for a second, so I was like in here, and then there's nothing for like a minute. I got my card. I put it on my wall. Hold on. I'll put it on my wall. We didn't have another frame, but I want to get a frame and put it up like Dinky's. I love it. It goes on the wall next to like every note I've ever gotten from every gift that anybody's ever sent me. So it's all on the wall. This is a special wall. So I put it on the special wall. Thank you. And I love it. Anyway, I just wanted to shout them out because they did send that to me and I picked it up yesterday and I opened it today right before the live. I was going to open it on the live and then I thought I might get really emotional. So I opened it right before the live and I did get a little bit emotional about it. So I put it up and I just wanted to make sure that I shouted them out for it and let them know that I had it. Oh, yeah. Did you want to see it? I'll show you. Where's the card? I can't really move it closer. There's a giant blanket over here and all my, I use the giant blanket as like a weird shelf. And all my electronics are like plugged in right above it. So I can't really move the ring light any closer to it, but I love it. Anyway, I wanted to let them know. And, I'll take another picture later for those of you that want to get a better picture of it and I'll post it in the redacted area. Yeah, you know, the eternal blanket, the infinity blanket. It's right, you know where it is. You've been in here, Dad. It's right by the side of the futon. So I can't put anything there. It's just a bunch of electronics on a pile of blankets. So I can't really move it any closer, but I'll take a better picture later and I'll put it in the redacted area so that way, if you want to see it, you can see it. But I wanted to thank Emmy. Yes, everybody get me yarn. No, don't do that. Don't everybody get me yarn. It isn't a fire hazard because I don't keep any hazardous material over here other than the electronics, and I unplug those. This is just the time where I have them plugged in. Okay? Look, it's fine. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm about. Yes, do that. No. No, that was for Dad. That was just for Dad. No, it's fine. And don't, there's some things I keep to myself, and that I just don't advertise. And one of those is that I've been trying to set, a world record for a few years now. And the world record that I was going for is world's largest granny square. So I have a giant granny square that's about 40 feet long now. So, and there's not a whole lot of places to store that. And it's really hard to wash. And like, you can't treat it like you do a normal blanket. So, it's sort of just in a giant pile right here, because this is like my corner where I sit and do most of my crocheting or knitting or whatever. So I just set it here because it's too big to move. It's actually quite an exercise trying to move it around while I'm working on it. So it's even harder to like get a space to store it. Yes, the one with the football field. So it is right here, and I just sort of keep it, and it's so tall now, it's just sort of like a folded up giant table that I set things on. Because there's no other space to put it. It doesn't fit in a giant tote anymore. I used to have a tote that I used to put it in, and now the lid won't close. So it's now so big it won't fit and store in like a normal storage compartment. It's been a long time coming. And I still have yarn for it. That's why I'm like, guys, don't give me yarn. I was just joking with Dad, because Dad has known about it for years. And I still have some yarn that I'm planning on using for it. Like, I have plenty of yarn, you guys. I have so much yarn over here. I have a giant one over there. There's a lot, and people give me their spare yarn in various colors. Sometimes when Dad finds discount yarn and stuff, he gives it to me. That's what I was talking about. You guys don't have to send me yarn. You're good. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Lady Eva. I was getting to that, but thank you. Yeah, it's big. It's big, and I got a ways to go. Yeah, it's so heavy right now, you guys. It's so heavy. So even just like trying to like maneuver it to get to the side that I'm working on is terrible. I actually just tangled up all this yarn right next to me. Hold on. Hold on. The red is attached to the gray now. Hold on. I've made a mess. I'm gonna fix this really quick, and then we'll move on, and I'll redo some more. Oh no. Okay, I got it. Please don't knock over the phone. All right. But yeah, so I have plenty of yarn. You don't have to do that. Yeah. Anyway, that's my project that I don't really talk about that much. See, I don't like balling it. I don't like doing that. I like just make. So I got a bowl, and a funny story. It used to be Denki's job to ball the yarn, and like while I was working, he would like unroll it for me, and I thought it was like inconvenient for him, so I got a bowl. Knitters, you know what I'm talking about probably. I just moved that whole stand. Shit. I got a bowl. And you put the yarn ball in it, and then this one's tangled. But yeah, and so now when I first got the bowl, Denki was like, "What the fuck is that?" And I was like, it's like a bowl. You just put your yarn in it, and that way you don't have to unroll it for me. And he was like, "That was my job." And I was like, okay, well, you don't have to, I didn't know if I was annoying you. And he was like, "No, it was my job. What am I going to do now?" And they were like, "You replaced me with a fucking bowl?" And I was like, "Whoa, hey, thanks. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's not really a big deal." And he was like, "I'm going to break that fucking bowl." And he threatens to break it all the time. Yeah. I thought it was just annoying him, like it was inconvenient. So I was like, I'll just get like it was a utilitarian decision. I thought it was pragmatic. Anyway, whatever. And now he gets really mad at this bowl. Anyway, that was the knitting discussion. I hope you enjoyed that instead of Denki's rant. Denki's rant probably would be more entertaining. Yeah, Denki's real pissed about the bowl. Every time he sees me use it, he's like, I'm gonna knock that bowl off. I was like, don't break the bowl. I like it. I thought it was neat. Yeah.
I just wanted to come in and say I'm sorry there's no rant tonight and I love everyone.
Oh, Denki says he's really sorry he's not ranting tonight, but he loves all of you.
My mini-me is here visiting for tonight and they're more important than you. Sorry.
Yeah, Denki's sister is more important than all of you. Even though Denki loves you, sister's more important.
I don't get to see them very often, so we're going to play this weird board game. It's like a card game.
Everybody says hi. They say they love you too.
I'll try to hop into the vent channel later and just give a mini rant or something.
All right. Denki might rant later in the vent channel or something. Or in the there's a voice chat for you ranting.
Yeah, I know.
So you can just hop in that if you wanted to.
Yeah. I just wanted to come say hi.
The correct answer. All right.
Go into their chat. Yeah.
Solid. Well, I don't know what their plan is. It depends on how long Denki's sister's here. And how late y'all are up, I guess. So it might happen. And Denki's got a lot to complain about. And just don't say that I brought up the bowl. They're never gonna watch this, so they're not gonna catch it. But I know that if you bring up the bowl, they're gonna come harass me about the bowl. So don't do that. No bowl and no horses. Yeah, technically, I'm about to piss them off anyway because I was gonna get stuff for another project because I was gonna start on another blanket, and I was gonna go get material for it tomorrow and start on it probably later this week. So they're gonna inevitably be mad at me this week anyway because I'm gonna bring out the bowl again. They're gonna be like, "What the fuck's this bowl doing here?" Every single time, without fail. Also, one of my mutuals got me this mug, this caffeine mug, and I fucking love it. Yeah, they punched a police horse. What was worse is I was out of town, so they called me, and I was on a separate assignment out of it wasn't too far out of town. It was almost an hour away. So it was I was an hour away from town, and in the middle of something. I was in the middle of a shift, and I had no I wasn't gonna get off for another 3 hours. And I get a phone call from Denki, and he was like, "I think I broke my hand." I was like, "What'd you do?" It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. So they were like, "I think I broke my hand," and I was like, "What did you fucking do?" And they were like, so you know the horses on in it's this small fucking podunk area. I hope I didn't offend anybody by saying that, but it's true. And they were like, those one cops that aren't really cops, but they have the horses, and they do the thing where they go through the main street in the historical area, and I was like, uh-huh. They were like, "So I punched the horse." And I was like, have to go. I had to replace my... No. I used the cat mug this morning. I just like... I had a different coffee this morning. So I actually just used the cat mug and I have to rinse it out. So this was from this morning, so I have to wash that. They hate horses. They hate horses. They hated horses before this episode. So... But they actively hate horses, and they also are not the biggest fan of cops. Not to get super political, but a cab is definitely in their vocabulary. So, don't ban me for saying that on live, please. Oh, I had Lady Eva's. That's why I drink it out of the cat mug. Because I drank the Pete's this morning, and then I have, this is Bushwhacker. This is what I made right before the live. Yeah. Yeah, so I was hesitant to say it because technically they were a cop. They're not really a cop, they're kind of a cop. They're small cops with big egos. I'm not going to go into heavy detail. I could, and I will. No, I'm not. But yeah, they're just small town cops with big egos, with more gumption than they have any actual power to do anything with. And they like to do things like give out felonies to people who don't really deserve them. Yeah, I won't go into heavy detail about that either, but we're not the biggest fans. Yeah, there was also another dude that I used to... He was in a certain neighborhood that was like outside the city limits where there's a lot more farmland than actual like... And there was this guy habitually, and this is the same town that this would take place in, but habitually would ride up and down, like, and it's technically not even an interstate. It doesn't have a line in the median. This like back access road, but it was a main road to like get out of this like sort of backcountry area that you were going in. He habitually would just be drunk riding on a horse. This is a civilian, not a cop, but it just made me think of it. He would just habitually be drunk and ride on this horse down out of town. And I would always have to pass him about 2 or 3 times on a patrol and just like be like, yo, you should really get on the main road for that. And he would just be like, don't tell me, I've been riding for 20 years. And I'm like, and he would always have like a brown paper bag with like a can in it. And I don't know what it was, but I'm not, I know it's not. I know it's probably something stronger, but in my heart of hearts, I'm like, it's Four Loko in that bag. I know it. I know it. Yeah, so the horse was fine. That one is specified. The horse was always cool. To me, don't tell Dinky I said that. Dinky knows I was complimenting horses. It's over. Yeah, I was just like, this guy's fucked up. And like, I didn't ever really want to bother him. Like, he's just minding his own business. He wasn't like belligerent or anything. So I'm never going to be like, you know, be a dick about it. But that guy was hilarious. I'm sure that's how Denki would see it. Don't bring it up to him. He'll slay me later. When your DD is a horse. Oh, I can't wait till we get to the zebras. Okay. Sorry, that's in the next book. I just like thinking about it. Okay. Who wants to stick around for the stinger? Zebras. You know what I'm talking about. You've read it. You and T Galaxy know. It's gonna be awesome. 2. Are we all ready for the tomb of Umtak Ktharl? All right. Sweet. We're gonna start. If everybody's ready. The tomb of Umtak Ktharl. Just around the corner from the Haymarket, the knowledgeable Londoner will note a discreet and understated portico, under which stands a discreet and understated doorman in a discreet and understated hat. By the door is a small brass plaque, which, for the sake of completeness, shall be described as discreet and understated. The plaque declares quietly that the establishment it marks is called Blake's. It says no more because the knowledgeable Londoner needs no more. Within its portals, which are not hallowed because enhallowment suggests some fame, and this is an anathema to the establishment, lie facilities of comfort and convenience for the rare variety of clubbable men who do not care for clubs. In all conceivable senses, it is a club for gentlemen, but in a single, ineffable sense, it is not. And that is what attracts a particular caste. Nor is it sheer coyness to say that this exotic factor is inevitable. It is a je ne sais quoi of which one literally does not know what. The nature of this curious factor is neither germane to the following narrative, nor even to the jealousies of rival clubs, which are simply aware of the existence of Blake's men and are content to leave them in Blake's. Certainly, there was a little beyond its doors, hallowed or otherwise, to mark it out as anything but one of the smaller clubs of the great metropolis. There is a dining room, studies, some rooms for members to stay overnight should the need arise, and a library, which, despite its books going untouched from one year to the next, is the most popular room in the place. Here the members slouch in overstuffed chairs, hold desultory conversations, and read newspapers, that is, although the otherwise unloved books get the occasional perusal, provided that they are either a volume of Wisden or, oddly enough, Quiller Couch's Oxford Book of English Verse. On a wintry evening, the members had concluded a pleasant dinner, the majority enjoying an excellent beef Wellington, followed by spotted dick and custard, finishing with a good port served with a varied cheese board, and had retired to the library to cap the evening with brandy and cigars. There they occupied their habitual seats and settled into a warm and happy glow as they chatted about politics and sport. Chiltern, who seemed to spend every morning memorizing the newspapers so that he should never be without a topic for conversation, was settling forth his views on the marvels that the Greeks seemed to regard as theirs. These views seemed uncannily similar to those of the morning's editorial, but that was Chiltern. He regarded the newspaper as a useful alternative to having to evolve any opinions of his own. "They're ours," he said, having his pipe stem at Prothero, who seemed to be asleep. "How dare those Grecians start laying down the law to us? To us! As if we hadn't removed the blessed things, the Turks would have probably blown them up or something." He glowered. "You know what the Turks are like." Chiltern had read history and had yet to forgive the fall of Constantinople. "How much does a Greek earn?" asked Tompkinson abruptly of anybody. "I mean, what does a Greek earn?" "Drachmas, I should think," said Monroe, sketching Chiltern in profile. "None too flattering at that." "That's what they use instead of money over there." No, said Tompkinson, shaking his head emphatically. "I mean, what's a Greek earn?" He looked around until he caught somebody's eye. On this occasion, the poor unfortunate was Kay, the professor of chemistry. "About 5 bob," said Tompkinson. Kay looked at him blankly. It's a joke," Tompkinson explained. What's a Greek urn? About 5 bob, Kay ventured. No, you're supposed to say it's a bit of pottery or similar. It's a pun. Thingy. Urn. EARN, he spelled out. An urn. URN, it sounds the same, but it's different. Homophone, supplied Monroe. Well, good Lord, if you can't take a joke, said Tompkinson, and subsided into an aggrieved silence, for which they were all very grateful. One should be very careful with archaeology, said Enright from where he stood by the fireplace. Everybody stopped and looked at him. Enright was something of a mystery. Blake's was, as has already been intimated, a club of slightly unusual attributes, this slightness being of such a degree that nobody was sure exactly which attributes were specifically the unusual ones. There had been the incident of the whiskers in the water closet, and some of the members became very tight-lipped should the words clockwork and Lord Palmerston ever accidentally find themselves in the same sentence, but these were no more than the common eccentricities of any establishment. Enright, by comparison, was a riddle, wrapped in a mystery inside a very tasteful Holland and Sherry suit. No one knew very much about him. He came highly recommended from a former member, and sailed gracefully and somewhat laconically through the selection committee. It seemed that the club was perhaps his only social indulgence, as he was never seen at any of the other many parties that one attends in and about town. Attempts at gentle investigation into his past by having a word with his primary sponsor came to naught when that gentleman took a nosedive off a beachy head after some share options turned out to be less than on the square. Even the committee had been reticent on discussing Enright's background. Everyone made non-committal noises about salt of the earth and confidentiality, but seemed discomforted and eager to change the subject. Thus, it may be understood that all were intrigued about anything to do with Enright, and all listened attentively as he spoke on this occasion. Careful with archaeology, echoed Chiltern. What's that supposed to mean? One might as well say one should be circumspect with ornithology, or perhaps there are dangers incipient in accountancy. Hear, hear, said Wilson, whose wife had run off with a chartered accountant. Sorry, Wilson. Still, what do you mean, Enright? Careful with archaeology. Just what I say, no more and no less. Good heavens, said Clifton, folding his newspaper and putting his reading glasses into his top pocket. I do believe there's a story here. A story? Enright took a spill from the pot on the mantelpiece, lit it from the fire, and used it to rekindle his cigar. Perhaps there is. There is certainly a salutary warning to the curious. Don't be so dashed mysterious, Enright, chimed in Kay. Is there a tale to be told, or isn't there? Perhaps it was the impatience in his tone, but Enright shot Kay a warning glance that the chemist didn't like at all. It was too late for discretion, however. The others had the scent of a yarn and would worry Enright like terriers with a rat until they had it out of him. To his credit, he knew an impossible position when he saw one. He warmed the brandy in his glass and took a sip as he considered his words. Then he began. I appreciate that I seem something of a dark horse amongst you, said Enright. Only the committee know anything of my background, and I swore them to silence upon their word. I fear I shall have to ask the same of you. This demand raised no eyebrows. If a shilling had been entered into a fund every time a member of the club agreed to tell a story only under the most sober promise of secrecy, it would by now contain £2, 17 shillings, and sixpence to cover Battersby's tale of his cuckolding. Everybody knew about that well before Battersby did, so it was only worth half a bob. The assembly made its usual collection of incoherent mumbles to signify agreement, and he continued. I've seen a great deal of the world in my 40 years, sometimes rather more than any Christian would want to see. I was at Panisha in year 85. I was in the Gusar Valley shortly after the Desolé suppression, and on the occasion I am thinking of, I was in Mercarvia during the rioting after the assassination of Emperor Antrobus II. I should point out that at all these times, and others too numerous to mention, I was acting as a private citizen. My loyalties, however, lie with the crown in all affairs. I am, I like to think, a patriot, and I believe it is in my duty to see what is to be seen and report it to the proper authorities. Good Lord, interjected Chilton at this point. You're an amateur spy! He looked around aghast. Another one! He was always put out to discover that yet another fellow member was a spy, so he was about the only member who had never been one. He did, however, maintain hopes that one day a coded letter might accidentally make its way into his hands, or that a desperate government agent might hoarsely whisper some vital secret into his ear before succumbing to a knife between the shoulder blades. Then, he was sure, he would show his mettle and save the day. Towards this happy adventure, he received a good many yellow books and brought a bowler hat containing a concealed camera. The others shushed him, and Enright continued. The rioting was very ugly and threatened to turn into civil war at any moment. I stayed as long as I could, but foreigners quickly came to be regarded as agents provocateurs by elements of both sides, and I found it necessary to leave. My departure was neither as ordered nor as leisurely as I might have hoped, and I found myself on horseback with a few belongings heading for the neighboring estate of Senza in the wee hours of the morning. There was a misunderstanding at the frontier. The border guards made fractious and suspicious by the events of the moment, and I was forced to ride on with bullets threading the night air behind me. I made it through unscarred, but my horse was less lucky. She was a skittish mare, all I could lay hands on at short notice, and she creased upon her left flank by one of the guard's wild shots. The combination of her fragile nature and the mild but stinging wound conspired to drive her into a frenzy of fear, and she bore me deep into the dense forest that is common in that part of the world. I'd venture to say that I am not a novice in the saddle, but that nightmare's ride filled me with apprehension as she bore me through the closely packed trunks of ancient twisting trees as if the devil himself were at our heels. There was no hope of controlling her. Her neck was iron, and she cared little for the bit that I pulled fiercely back into her mouth. She was beyond fear of a mere man. I was no longer her rider, but simply a passenger. I clung on to her as long as I could, and she tore blindly through the forest. I could not help but think of the tales my old Scottish nanny used to tell me of the water horses of her country that tempted the unwary onto their backs and ran them insanely along the banks of the loch, terrifying their hapless victims before plunging into the waters and drowning them, the easier to feast upon their flesh. That started me worrying about the streams that crisscross the valleys there, running off the mountain ranges that delineate the many-pocked states. And then, suddenly, it was morning. I've been knocked unconscious before and am familiar with the small loss of memory that comes with it, so I was not unduly concerned that I could not recall precisely how I had lost my horse. Indeed, a wound on my brow suggested that I had been swept off her back by a low bow. I was, however, very concerned to discover that my clothes were filthy, and I found that I had a beard of several days' growth. As I lay there, I heard voices, and looking to one side, realized that I had been laid out in a clearing in the woods. My horse, that wretched beast, was tied up by a tree with two others, and, by a small fire, two men were going through my saddlebags. I have a small gift for languages, but their parochial dialect of Mercarvian German was difficult to follow, salted as it was with Catamenian words, and only with difficulty could I make out what they were talking about. What I heard filled me with anger, but made me apprehensive for my safety. They appeared to be bandits, and happened across me. They consistently referred to me as the Baramarcu Arslenderfots, a singularly insulting term for foreigner in a state of confusion. Seeing that pickings rarely got easier than an amnesiac upon an injured horse, they had ridden after me and knocked me from the saddle. They kept speaking of me in the past tense, and I realized that they believed this second fall had killed me. In fact, it had restored me to my senses. I remembered reading Malory in my youth and thought of the mad Lancelot lost in the forest. I couldn't remember what happened to him, but I doubted he had recovered his wits to discover a pair of thieves bickering over his field glasses. I laid doggo and considered my next move. If they discovered me to be alive, I had little doubt they would cut my throat and consider it small inconvenience. I felt weak, and my wound, I had been fortunate that the bandits had not seen me stir and touch it, burned abominably, suggesting some infection. Fighting them was out of the question. Thus I was left with little option but to continue to lie quite still and play dead. After some further argument, the two villains finished splitting my belongings between them, took their horses and mine, and made to leave. One briefly wondered whether they should bury me, but the other said to leave me for the wolves and bears. The first was unhappy about this, and I had the sense that he was superstitious about mistreatment of the dead, a courtesy he notably didn't extend to the living. Thankfully, his companion was made of sterner stuff, and belittled him for his fears until they both left, the former in a nervous dudgeon. For safety's sake, I lay still for several minutes after the sound of their movement had faded away. I was in a dilemma, injured, weakened, and lost, without food or water. What was I to do? I've been in a good few scrapes in my time, but, to be frank, none had seemed this hopeless, and it took a few moments to fight a sense of despair that arose in me as the gravity of my situation made itself perfectly apparent. Of course, I was able to rein such sensations back. Despair is an enemy just as any other. But at least it can be fought with action, at which point I heard an animal moving close by. I stayed perfectly still. Most bears, no matter what the bandits had said, are not especially interested in dead meat until it has become a little gamey. They are, however, easily antagonized, and judging by the sounds the animal was making, it was more likely to be a bear than a wolf. I lay absolutely still, eyes shut, and listened as the animal came closer and closer by degrees, obviously suspicious of the clearing. There would be silence for seconds, sometimes minutes on end, and I would think it had moved on. Then I would hear it again, still cautious, still closer. The blood was pounding in my head as my heart raced, goading me to leap to my feet and either fight or run. I knew that either course would almost certainly result in my death. There was nothing to do but wait. Can you imagine what it felt like? Even now, I remember with perfect clarity what it was to lie there and hope against hope that whatever was interested in my prone form was not hungry at that moment. Then I felt its shadow fall across me, and I knew that everything would be settled one way or the other in a few moments. "You are quite the least convincing corpse I think I've ever clapped eyes upon," said the creature, causing my own eyes to snap open with surprise. The creature was a man, standing over me and giving me a look of such sour criticism that I felt faintly ashamed, as if caught in a commission of a puerile practical joke. I sat up and immediately regretted such rapid movement, as my head whirled and I felt dangerously nauseous. "Somebody's been using your head as a punch bag," said the man, studying me coldly, as if I were but a microbe upon a microscope stage. He knelt by me, pulled back my eyelid, and studied the white. "Mild concussion," he said. "You'll live." "You're a doctor?" He smiled, and it was like a bloodless cut. "No," he replied, amused by something. "No, not a doctor. I haven't the bedside manner for it." "But you've had medical training." He seemed to find this line of questioning boring. "Self-taught, largely," he replied in a dismissive tone, before adding, "Look, we're both a long way from civilization, and those brigands have horses. I suggest we appropriate them." "Yes, you're right, of course." After I'd floundered around on the ground for a moment, he deigned to help me up. "My name's Enright," I said. He nodded, and he set off across the clearing in the direction the thieves had taken. He showed no indication of answering my implicit inquiry. "And your name is?" I called finally, as I stumbled after him. "A closely guarded secret. Do keep up, Enright." Prothero, apparently snoozing by the fire, muttered, "A curious cove," before lapsing into gentle snores. As I walked with the stranger, I took the opportunity to study him. He stood around the 6-foot mark, perhaps a little taller, perhaps a little shorter, but not by much in either direction. His hair was blonde, a very Nordic blonde, that matched the faint German accent I detected in his speech. He seemed not to have shaved for a few days. His clothes were an odd choice for traveling through a dense forest, too. He was wearing a city suit, and a conservatively cut one at that. It was as if a civil servant had been plucked from the streets of the government district and dropped into the wild. I remembered noting that he had a sorely battered and aging red carnation in his buttonhole. And when I pointed this out, he looked at it with surprise and said something about forgetting that it was there. He then plucked it from his lapel and tossed it into the undergrowth, with a sour remark about life having seemed to be a good deal more agreeable on the morning that he bought it. All this said, I must have looked as ill-prepared for the rigors of the forest as he, and I made the natural assumption that he, as I, was a refugee from the troubles. "You don't talk much," he said suddenly. "I thought we were trying to catch them unawares." "Just so. Based on the evidence, however." He indicated a clear trail running through some bushes, leading across a slope. "We're not dealing with the world's most cunning criminals. I'm hardly frontier material myself, but this is really pathetic." "They probably think they're safer this far from the beaten track." "Well," said the stranger, "we shall simply have to disabuse them of that notion." We followed the trail until it met with a small stream running out of the hillside and turned up the slope. I was about to continue the hunt when I noticed that my mysterious companion had paused by the stream. I guessed that he wanted to get some water, which seemed to be an excellent idea. I crouched by the bank, scooped up a cupped handful of water, and supped. The liquid was barely in my mouth before I spat it out again. I cannot communicate how foul that water was. "Well, at least have a go," prompted Monroe. "Can't be as bad as one of Kay's gin slings." "I say," Kay said. Enright shook his head and continued. "It didn't simply taste bad. It was bad. As it touched my tongue, it was as if all the world's corruption had gathered there. A horrible, rancorous sensation that made my heart quail and touched my soul. As I staggered back from the stream, retching violently, as I was about to say," commented the stranger evenly, "I wouldn't drink from the stream if I were you." He gestured to take in the banks, and I saw what he had already seen, what had attracted his attention. They were barren, completely devoid of plant life up until their upper edges, where a few stunted and somehow unwholesome specimens clung disconsolately. "There's something very wrong with the water here." "You might have said something earlier," I said, coughing. "I didn't realize what you were doing until you'd done it," he said, and smiled that cold smile again, and I was about to remonstrate that he had every opportunity to stop me when I abruptly realized something that left a taste in my mouth almost as filthy as that accursed water. He hadn't stopped me for a reason. He wanted to see what effect the water would have. There was a pause while the usual mutters of "cad" and "bounder" were aired. Then, to add insult to injury, he produced a notebook, presumably recorded the results of his little experiment, and said, "Let's see where this comes from." We followed the stream up the hill in silence until it vanished into the earth in a hollow overshadowed by an embankment. My companion knelt at the edge of the stream and tried to see exactly where the water bubbled out from, but there seemed to be a cave, for want of a better description, barely large enough to kennel a dog, overgrown with weeds that hung down from the slope above, safely away from the herbicidal qualities of the spring. Displeased with his vantage point, he lay flat out and peered into the gloom. "It's just a spring," I said, exasperated with his behavior. "Just a spring," he repeated. He took some sort of small black leather folder from his pocket and opened it to reveal the heads of several test tubes. Selecting one that contained a clear liquid and an eye-drop pipette, he took a small quantity of water from the stream. He held the tube and the pipette up for me to see, and then, without fanfare, let a drop of the stream water fall into the tube. The result was immediate and dramatic. The two liquids reacted violently, fizzing furiously and flashing with a strange cobalt blue phosphorescence that lasted for a few moments after the initial hissing had calmed. "Good Lord," I said. I may have said something stronger. I was so moved by the idea that I had the filthy liquid in my mouth, however briefly. "What is in that tube?" "This." He stopped the tube and put it into his breast pocket. "It's holy water, and that," he pointed at the stream, "is very unholy water." He craned to look into the tiny cave again. "There's writing in there." He produced his notebook and began laboriously transcribing what he could see. I stood over him, uncertain what to think. "Unholy water," I ventured at last. "I've never heard of it." "It's not the sort of thing Mother Church tends to advertise, and with good reason. You can combust a bishop with this stuff, just as well for the serried ecclesiasticals of the world that it's so uncommon, all of which makes such water bubbling out of the ground by the gallon all the more interesting, wouldn't you say?" "Who are you?" He didn't look up, but I noticed that he stopped writing. "Does the name Johannes Cabal mean anything to you?" I didn't even seem familiar, and I said as much. He started writing again. "Then that is who I am." When no further elucidation was forthcoming, I said, "You behave as if I might know you." "I make enemies easily. I have a good memory, but it gets difficult to keep track of all the people who might have an interest in me. It's a substantial list. To return to the matter at hand, however." He sat up and studied the writing that had been transcribed. I looked at it over his shoulder, but it simply looked like chicken scratching to me. No alphabet that I'd ever seen. The head of the spring isn't natural. It's worked stone and looks more like a drain to me. These markings are curved into the stone of the head. Look a lot like Ugal letters, wouldn't you say? Rather pithy, too. Look at the figure that starts and finishes the inscription. That's a triple imperative. The so-called black exclamation, failure to obey, carried the death penalty back in the time of the Haas. As to what it's enforcing, he paused, frowned, and looked up at me. "Do not block." "They took their plumbing very seriously," I joked, but Cabal was not in the mood. 700 years ago, you couldn't move in these valleys for Ugal raiders with fur hats and ridiculous horses. They swept westward, carving swaths through several empires en route, and nobody seemed able to stop them. The incursions started to slow down not long after they came through here, before petering out entirely. Their leader, the great Haas Majen, was an old man by that point. His ill health was probably what stopped the hordes in their tracks. He's supposed to have died somewhere around here. And they buried him, and all his wealth beneath a hill. Unimaginable riches just sitting there, waiting to be found. I couldn't help but look at the hill upon whose slopes we were standing with widening eyes. "Good heavens, Cabal, you don't suppose—" "Perhaps." He shrugged and seemed maddeningly unconcerned by the possibility. "One cannot help but wonder, however, why any treasure trove would require running unholy water, only to let the stuff pour down a hillside. The answer lies closer to the summit, I fancy, along with those thieves and their horses." So saying, he continued up along the trail, biting back all too many questions I had little choice but to follow. Within a few minutes, however, Cabal resigned the leader as the bandits' den hove into view. A cave mouth ahead of us showed signs of frequent congress. Footprints and hoofprints led in and out, and as we listened, we heard a horse neigh from within. Cabal started to say something, but I tersely gestured him to silence as a pair of the brigands walked out, chattering with foolish disregard for their own security. I recognized them immediately as the two who had robbed me of whatever belongings had remained with me through my period of amnesia. My grim anger at seeing them again must have been apparent as I looked sideways at Cabal to discover him smiling quite openly at me. "Friends of yours?" he mouthed with faux innocence. I glared at him and turned my attention back to the men. One was hanging close by the cave mouth, the one who had been so concerned that I might return from the dead to punish them. The other was already heading for the tree line down the slope. He said something dismissively and plunged into the gloom. After a moment, with clear misgivings, the other followed him. As soon as they were out of sight, Cabal was up and running for the cave. I followed him closely. "Careful," I warned him. "There may be more." "No," said Cabal, pausing to check that the wood seemed clear. "They were arguing about leaving the cave again when they're supposed to be guarding it. Apparently the rest of the merry men are off, taking advantage of the refugees who were driven from Mercarvia and the recent unpleasantness. Theirs was an ugly mongrel tongue, but the meaning was quite apparent. Come on and write. We may not have long." We ducked around the corner and ran inside. I wasn't expecting the cave of Ali Baba, and I wasn't disappointed. The first thing that struck us was a near palpable wall of stench, human as well as horse odor. What little light there was in that foul place was provided by a few torches and many crudely formed clay lamps burning animal fat through coarse wicks. The atmosphere was oppressive with smoke. And I wondered aloud what sort of men would willingly choose this kind of life over one in the open air. "The usual sort," said Cabal, taking a torch from the crack into which it was wedged. "Desperate men, just like you and just like me." Ignoring him and his nonsensical talk, I went straight to the horses and quickly chose the two most promising. The mare that had caused me all this trouble in the first place could stay there for all I cared. I turned to pass the reins of this mount to Cabal, only to find him gone. A flickering light down a rocky side passage showed where he'd vanished. I called after him in an urgent hiss, but he failed to respond. Cursing him and his misjudged and ill-timed curiosity, I tied off the horses again and followed him at a trot. I found him at the end of the passage examining the cul-de-sac he'd ended up in. "Are you mad, Cabal? If they come back, we'll be trapped. The treasure of the Great House can wait for some future date, can't it? If those fools are still resorting to horse theft, then it hardly seems likely they've found it, or will at any moment soon. Come on, we don't have time to dally." I might as well have been talking about the weather. "Convincing, isn't it?" he said, blithely unconcerned with our danger. "What is?" I asked impatiently. "This," he said, and moved the torch close to the rock face. "What are you blathering about, man?" I started to say, and then the words froze in my throat. The natural rock face, lined with the cracks of 100,000 nights of cold and as many days of warmth, was no such thing. Under the oblique light cast by the flickering torch, the cracks resolved themselves into regular markings. Letters, just like the ones I had seen Cabal transcribe by that curious stream. In fact, some were exactly alike. "The black exclamation," I muttered, caught up in the mystery of the moment despite myself. "Just so," said Cabal, distracted. "The black exclamation. But the warning is different this time, still terse though. 'Do not enter.' Not very equivocal, is it?" He experimented for a few seconds with the torch, altering how its light fell as he tried to tease the secret out of the other hidden letters. "Know this, thou foolish thief. No, interloper. Know that to go beyond here is to suffer not only death in this life, but the one that is to follow." "A curse?" "No. The Ugo like their curses to go on for several stanzas. This is a warning. They believed in reincarnation, you see, not only death in this life, but the one that is to follow. It's saying that you will be killed so very thoroughly that your reincarnation will die by it too. That's not the kind of thing they'd say lightly. It is not for me to say I am a brave man, but I believe I can at least claim not to be a coward, physically or morally. Yet as we stood in that close passageway and read those dire words of warning, inscribed 700 years before and likely never read until then, I felt a sense of nervous tension that I had never experienced before. The walls, lit by the fitful dancing flame, were covered in strange shadows that seemed to crowd about us. The air was thick enough to touch. There, gentlemen, within the living stone of that hill, I think I felt the slender, strong fingers of mortal, nameless fear close around my heart. Enright paused in his narrative to light another cigar. We waited in utter silence for the minute that the commonplace ritual lasted. When he spoke again, it was a shock. Thus, when the bandits returned in force, it was actually something of a relief. A relief to be confronting a foe I understood on terms I was familiar with. A relief to face a known quantity. Admittedly, they would probably murder us in cold blood, but that, at least, was something I could apprehend and fight against. First, we heard the clatter of hooves on the stone floor of the cave entrance and the laughter of men back from a successful day's butchery. Leaving Cabal searching for the entrance implied and the warning for a moment, I walked quickly and quietly up to the opening of the passage into the main body of the cave and looked cautiously around the corner. There were a dozen of them, if there was one. Dangerous men of evil aspect. The pair they'd left behind to guard the hideout were obviously the least of them, lowered still further by their evident dereliction of duty. Their leader looked around, and his smiling countenance showed his displeasure at their absence. A moment later they ran in. The cockier of the two affected to slow to a saunter as he came to his leader's notice. There was some barked derogatory remarks that left the less self-assured guard cowering and begging. The rest of the surly gang gathered around as the other guard stood up to his leader and spoke dismissively. The cave was safe, he seemed to be saying. Why the complaints? Who was the leader to second-guess the man on the spot? The coxcomb actually swaggered back and forth as he spoke, taking the dark smiles of the other bandits as approbation. I did not. I knew their look, had seen it on the faces of righteous executioners and priests watching the innocent burn, seen it too many times to mistake it, or the horrid sense of foreboding that always came with it. It wasn't approval I saw in their eyes. It was anticipation. And when the leader, an ugly bear of a man, swept a curved dagger from its sheath, held it up just long enough for the guard to see it, to understand its import, and then he smashed it down into the hapless man's chest. The blow was brutal, but it was not efficient. I think it took the guard almost a minute to die, sobbing and pleading for help as his blood ran free and hot over his fingers. A minute of laughter and derision, and his comrades watched his life flow across the floor to mix with the filth. Sickened, I quietly returned to Cabal. I found him behaving oddly, using his fingers like a cartographer's dividers to measure out distances on the rock face. He listened as I told him about the number of bandits and pursed his lips. The fate of the guard he greeted with a nod and, "Good. One less to worry about." "No man deserves to die like that," I said, angered by his insouciance. "Or kicking on the end of a length of state-owned rope, or blown to pieces on a battlefield, or quietly in bed surrounded by loved ones." He spat out these last words venomously. "One cannot pick and choose. You shouldn't be railing against the manner of death, Enright." "And you find nothing to fear in death, I suppose?" "Only one thing." He drew a line with his left fingertip along a crack and then continued down to where his right waited, having finished its curious measurings. He mouthed, "Perfect," and pushed hard. There was a hollow grating sound of stone on stone, and the end of the passage swung in and back. Cabal looked at me and said, "It's inevitability," and plunged into the darkness beyond. I admit I stood gawping at the secret entrance, so perfectly concealed, for a long moment until Cabal's irritated voice, demanding the torch, broke me from my daze. The passageway continued down perhaps only another 10 feet or so before opening out abruptly. I stepped out into this new cave and held the torch high. I confess I was harboring some childish expectations of what the tomb of the great Has Majen would look like. and I envisaged a cavern, its soaring vaulted ceiling supported by cyclopean columns, heaped piles of treasure of unimaginable worth, and at the center of it all a great golden sarcophagus, perhaps standing by the famous war chariot of legend. Instead, I found that we were in a roughly hemispherical cave, perhaps 40 feet across, with a pond in the middle. High on one wall, a V-shaped hole vented water that ran down the rock in a steady flow into a gutter. The gutter, in turn, fed a square pool that led exactly in the middle of the floor. Perhaps 6 feet along the edge, the gutter ran over, and 10 in the other dimension. At the other end of the pool, another deeper gutter took the overflow and ran it off into a sinkhole. Much time and effort had clearly been spent in the excavation, construction, and concealment of that place, yet its purpose was, to me at least, unfathomable. Cabal went to where the water flowed into the room, took some in his cupped hands, and tasted it. "If you still have a thirst, Enright, you can slake it here. The water's good." He walked around the pool to the other gutter, and, taking the tube of holy water from his pocket, allowed a drop to fall from it into the runoff. There was a brief flash of blue fire as the two liquids mingled. He nodded, clearly pleased that the experiment had performed as expected. "And this is the source of the remarkable stream." "Now I wonder what it is," he said, going to one knee by the pool, "that lies in here and has been supernaturally corrupting spring water by the ton for 7 centuries. I didn't like the calculating way he said it, and I was glad to find something to distract him. "Cabal, look!" In the torchlight, I had made out of more of the carvings, this time plainly written. He was with me in a moment. "This one looks quite simple. No triple imperatives, no flowery discursions, just thou who hast entered here, know thy folly. For the sake of thine soul and the sanctity of life upon life, leave now. This is the tomb of—" It was hard to tell beneath the unsteady light of the torch, the unshaven chin, the dirt of the woods, and his own sallow complexion, yet I had the distinct impression that Cabal paled. "Umtak Ktharl," he said finally in a ghastly thin voice. "What did you say?" I demanded. My voice seemed to shake him out of the state of mental paralysis he'd retreated into, and he turned to me with a new, urgent vitality. "I said," he said, snatching the torch from my hand and heading for the entrance, "we're leaving. Now." Remonstrations were pointless as he gained the exit and moved out of sight. Cursing my impetuous companion, I went after him. I caught up with him at the corner of the passage in the main cave, where he was glaring at the bandits from concealment, apparently trying to will them into non-existence. "Who's Umtak Ktharl?" I whispered urgently. "That doesn't matter," he whispered back. "We should be concerning ourselves with how to escape." "No, it does matter. Why are you so scared?" He glared at me. "I am not scared," he barked, rather too loudly. The bandits all turned to look at us. Cabal looked at him and then looked back at me. "Now look what you made me do," he said exasperatedly. Then he walked up to the nearest bandit as if he had every right to be there. "Guten Abend," he said. The bandit looked at him with sheer disbelief. "We're so very sorry, but we've rather been forced into precipitate action. 1,000 pardons." So saying, he pulled the bandit's revolver from his belt and shot him through the head. He backed towards me, firing twice more, snatched up a rifle that was lying at hand, and threw it to me. "We'll just be holding up down here. Feel free to try and wrinkle us out." He turned and ran back down the passage, with me close at his heels. I swear there was a count of 3 before the bandits fully appreciated what had happened. Our unexpected appearance and Cabal's easy resort to great violence had quite discomfited them. Then the bullets started flying. "Now what?" I asked him as we sought cover in the tomb cave. "I'm no military man, thankfully," replied Cabal as he laid himself flat beneath a partially emergent boulder. "But in their place there are 2 obvious plans. The better of the two is simply to ascertain that there is no exit from here and seal us in. In a couple of weeks, they can wander in with complete impunity. And the second? Although I was sure I already knew. The second is purest folly, a frontal assault. Here they come. The villains, unappreciative that everything comes to him who waits, had massed on the other side of the entrance, and were running in, zigzagging across the floor in an attempt to reach cover. Cabal fired and missed the first through. It took a little more time, and the poor light of a few torches that had been thrown in, and put a bullet in the wretch's chest. Cabal fired once more at the entrance, and then I heard his revolver clack uselessly. He snapped the cylinder out and studied the chambers. A cautious man. He didn't carry a live round under the hammer. 5 shots. I'm out. He closed up the pistol resignedly and dropped it on the floor. Make your shots count better than I did mine, and right. A couple of the bandits had reached cover and were firing from over our heads, probably trying for a lucky ricochet. They stood an excellent chance of getting one, too, given the confines we found ourselves in. Happily, ammunition became a concern, and they slowed to some desultory sniping. I lay there behind that boulder, knowing what it really was to be between a rock and a hard place. My rifle's magazine held on another 4 rounds, and there had to be at least 8 bandits left. Our death was a certainty, and the only choice left to us was how easy we made it for them. I'd made up my mind to make it as difficult as possible, and I suspected that Cabal was of the same liver, and after a few minutes the ringing in my ears from the close gunfire had subsided to the point that I could hear the surviving bandits arguing amongst themselves. "What now?" I asked Cabal again, with less urgency this time. There hardly seemed much point. He sighed, picked up the useless revolver, and fidgeted with it as he replied, "We wait, while the better option occurs to them, and they wall us in, I suppose." "That's not very optimistic." He laughed humorlessly. "I don't see many grounds for optimism." He looked past the edge of the border of the pool. "You wanted to know who Umtak Ktharl was? If we are to die in his tomb, I might as well know who I'm going to be sharing eternity with." Cabal nodded. "That's fair. Very well. Every schoolboy knows of the great Has-Majen and his Ukol hordes. The stories talk of vast hordes of horsemen sweeping down from the earth-at steeps with Majen at their head and his ubiquitous war chariot. Nothing could stand before their unparalleled ferocity, expert horsemanship, uncanny archery, little ponies, comedic mustaches, and so on and so forth ad nauseum. Utter rot. I researched this period in some detail, and I'm confident that the horde barely exceeded 1,000 undisciplined men. Any defending army worth the name would have wiped the floor with them." "You're saying the history books are wrong." "I'm saying the history books have rationalized how a bunch of foul-smelling thugs managed to defeat every force thrown against them. The truth is too ugly for the historians in their ivory towers, so they've come up with the myth of an unbeatable army. The Ugol were unbeatable, but that's the only true part of it." "They had a secret weapon," I ventured. "No. Yes. Actually, yes, in a sense they did. A secret weapon, Umtak Ktharl. He was the great Haas's vizier, advisor, major domo. Actually, I think he ran everything, and the Haas was just there as a more acceptable figurehead. The Haas could roister and doister and do all that nonsense. Umtak Ktharl, on the other hand, was evil incarnate." I looked questioningly at him, but he was disassembling the revolver for his amusement and wasn't aware of me. "I first became aware of him when I read something called the Red Snow," Cabal continued. "Red snow that fell from a clear sky, and where it touched human flesh, it dissolved it, and every flake sighed as it ate away from the meat of the man's bones, the sigh of tiny ribbon of vital essence leaking away into thin air. Entire armies were reduced by it. Kings lived in fear of it, and it was only one of the novelties in Ktharl's bag of tricks. Some were much, much worse. Who would stand against any army backed by a warlock like that? A necromancer, I corrected. He seemed to be about to lose his temper and took a moment to swallow his irritation. I affected not to notice. No, he said finally, and his voice betrayed no emotion. Not a necromancer. They are men of a very different stripe. This warlock was the reason for the Horde's success, the only reason. Kingdoms would be abandoned at the very whisper that the great Haas and his eminence Greece were coming. If Ktharl were entombed here, it explains why the Horde withdrew soon after they passed through this land. They very wisely appreciated that the jig was up and it was time to cut and run. Not a pretty story. No. There's still something about this place I don't understand. Why the pool, the spring? Cabal looked at me again and smiled that ugly, cold smile of his once more. Isn't it obvious? He looked over at the pool and made as if to speak. Then his expression suddenly became horrified. And right. What's that there, by the gutter? Over there, man! I followed his glance. Near the gutter that fed spring water into the pool, there was something dark and ophidian. As I watched, it moved slowly and cautiously toward the running water. I blinked and then appreciated the illusion. The tail of the black snake ran back toward the body of the bandit I had shot. The flattened perspective, of course, it was obvious. It's blood, Cabal. Only blood. The effect on Cabal was astounding. He sat up, presenting himself as a beautiful target, and started yabbering at the bandits in furious German, pointing frantically at the dead man. Fortunately for him, my reactions were better than those of our persecutors. I dived across between cover and tackled Cabal, flattening him behind his boulder, even as a shot whizzed through the space he'd occupied a moment before. I hadn't been expecting gratitude, but I was unprepared for the vitriol Cabal blazed at me. Not much of it was in English, or even German, but what little I could make out doesn't bear repeating. I just saved your life, Cabal, I bellowed in his face. They would have had you otherwise. Them, he barked back. I'm not afraid of them. The worst they can do is kill us. Suddenly, I became aware of a bubbling sound like a great cauldron coming to a boil, and risking a peek by the boulder, I was astonished to see that the water in the pool was boiling. Beside me, Cabal sat with sharp anger and desperation. Blood! It's too late. There's blood in the water. And so there was. The slow trickle of blood from the bandit's body had finally reached the gutter, and thence the pool. I was never very bright at school in my divinity classes. Our teacher, Dr. Chat, was a patient man, but even he must have been sorely tried by my complete inability to absorb anything at all. Or at least I'd always believed none of it had stuck until looking at that extraordinary pool, its surface boiling fiercely and seeming to glow with subdued red like the sea over a submarine volcano. I heard dear old Chat's voice speak to me over the distance of years. It was a lesson about John the Baptist, and somebody had asked what baptism meant. It is the washing away of sins, Chat had replied in that dark wooden voice of his, and the washing away of our sins, and then I understood. Umtak Ktharl had been having his sins washed away for 7 centuries. 700 years of pure water driving over him as he lay at the bottom of that strange pool. 700 years of corruption being sapped from him, and he, a seemingly bottomless well of sin, hadn't been purified one whit. And in an instant I saw it all. The great Haas finally realizing that his vizier's gold surpassed those of any mortal man. The secret construction of this place, the luring of Umtak Ktharl here under some pretext, and then plunging him into the pool before he recognized the trap. As generations had been born, flourished, and died away, Umtak Ktharl had lain here, rendered powerless by the never-ending purity of a mountain stream, powerless, but still rotten to the core of his foul soul. At least, the purification had been never-ending, until the blood of a wicked man had spilt into it and it had been polluted. As I watched the boiling increase in intensity, Cabal slumped down behind the boulder and commented, rather flippantly, I thought, "Oh well, there's the end of the world as we know it." "Is there nothing we can do?" I started to ask him, but he hushed me with a raised finger. "I'm thinking," he said, and as he thought, Umtak Ktharl rose from the water. He seemed to half climb, half float from the pool, an Oriental who should, judging merely by the elements of his face, have been in his 40s, but there was something wrong in the way they worked together, perhaps caused by the uncertain light or my own state of mind, something that made him seem ancient beyond belief. The water streamed from his high brows, mercury across glass, and fell hissing like drops of lava to the rocky floor. He was dressed in a long, heavy robe with the type favored by the Ugal in the centuries past, but it was dark and featureless, hanging about him like a bed of weed, dank and horrid. It had no right to have survived its long immersion, of course, but mere physics were of little consequence in that cave in the moment. All of which were mere details beside those eyes. I cannot even begin to describe them, for as soon as I saw them I looked away. But I knew one thing of a certainty, and that is that they were not human. I knew nothing of this man's history, and have never gone to pains to find out since, for I have no desire to learn what precisely takes a man's eyes and replaces them with the voids that I had glimpsed. Perhaps his eyes were black orbs in his skull. I hope so, for the alternative was that he had no eyes at all, but saw through sockets filled by something so wrong for this world that they were not simply beyond description, but beyond apprehension. My sanity was saved by the bandits who, seeing only the warlock's back, opened fire. Umtak Ktharl staggered very slightly under the rain of bullets, like a man snagged his toe in a loose carpet, but catching himself in plenty of time. He seemed, if anything, faintly exasperated. Then he turned and set foot on dry ground for the first time in 35 generations. The instant they saw his face, the firing stopped. There was a moment of utter astonishment, and then one man made a horrible, high, whining scream of terror and bolted. It was the signal for a general rout. The surviving bandits threw themselves back into the passage, kicking and trampling those who were too slow. I saw Umtak Ktharl lazily wave his hand, and the hindmost bandit burst into fire, an unnatural fire of gray flames that consumed him within seconds. Yet he continued to scream, even as he fell into ashes, and for some moments afterwards his fate inspired his companions to yet greater exertions, and in the moment they had gone. Their nemesis followed with insolent leisure. Cabal and I were left alone, listening to their dying screams echoing in the entrance cave. "Bullets don't hurt him," I said somewhat hopelessly. "No, they don't. It would be a salutary lesson to those vermin that violence doesn't always get them what they want. Of course, it helps to be alive after a lesson to appreciate the nuances." His flippancy was starting to irritate me, and he saw it. "Look at the bright side," he added. "I think I have a plan." "Yes? What is it?" "Can't tell you. In the first place, there will be a lot of improvisation. In the second, I don't have time for explanations if we're to keep up with Ktharl. We mustn't lose him. Come on." He threw the disassembled revolver aside, and having seen that devil's imperviousness to bullets, I made to do the same with my rifle, but Cabal stopped me. "It might not kill him, but it can certainly attract his attention. Hold on to it." We moved quickly but cautiously back up to the passage to the entrance cave and happened upon the remains of some of the hapless bandits. No two of them had died in the same fashion. One body lay unwounded but gelatinous beside a pile of steaming bones that I took to be his skeleton. Another sat upright, leaning against a stalagmite, his head brilliantly alight, the flame consuming his flesh as a candle wick does the wax. Yet another lay sprawled on his back, having apparently vomited up his own heart. These were men who only minutes earlier I would willingly have killed myself have killed myself, yet at the least I would have offered them a quick and humane death. This, however, was far, far beyond the pale. Why? I asked Cabal. Why has he done this? Surely he has it within his power to kill quickly and painlessly. Why these monstrous acts? Fear. With his power, he can vanquish an army. With his reputation, he can conquer the earth. And he's probably rather out of practice anyway, I should think. These are the equivalent of piano exercises to him. Cabal looked at a human arm protruding from the cave's wall, a victim it would take pickaxes to extract. These are simple party tricks for somebody like Umtak Ktharl. He's still working the cricks out. We must catch up with him before he gets back into his stride. Another scream from outside showed that he didn't get far. From the shadows of the entrance, we watched as the last of the bandits was dangled by his ankles from a tree at the edge of the clearing. For a moment, I thought Ktharl had somehow bound him there, when, with a sick sense of horror, I realized that even the trees were doing his bidding. The bandit wasn't tied to the branch. The branch was actually wrapped around his ankles like a black snake. The tree leaned slightly, making a ponderous creaking, and then, with unbelievable rapidity, swung the terrified man at the trunk of a neighbor. His screaming stopped the instant his brains were dashed out. "Your plan, Cabal," I whispered, still shaken by what I'd seen. "Quickly, what is my role?" "Are you good at thinking on your feet?" "As good as any. Better than most." "Good. Get to those bushes over there. Act when you see my signal." What signal?" "You'll know it when you see it." With this, he walked once more straight towards his enemy. Umtak Ktharl saw him coming and turned to watch, mildly interested. He raised a hand to make one of the lazy gestures I now associated with an ugly death, and then Cabal did the most remarkable thing. He threw himself prostrate before the warlock and started babbling at him in some odd tongue. Ugo, I suppose, an obviously educated man, and a European to boot, groveling in such a way before an Oriental was a demeaning sight, and it seemed to take even Umtak Ktharl aback slightly. He lowered his hand and listened to what Cabal had to say. Then he spoke back, a question by the sound of it, in a strange high voice, thin and complex like birdsong. It was fascinating, and I could have watched for some time, but I remembered Cabal's plan, such as it was, and crawled on my belly to the cover of the bushes, my rifle held firmly in my hands for instant action. Reaching them, I climbed to my knees and furtively parted the leaves to see how Cabal was getting on. He appeared to be making some headway, as he was now on his knees with his head bowed. There seemed to be some sort of question and answer session going on. I guessed that this was for the first part of Cabal's plan, to gain the monstrous lich's confidence. Then what, I had no idea, nor could I guess my part in it. As it happened, I didn't have to wait long. Cabal had somehow ingratiated himself in the space of 15 or 20 minutes that he was allowed to rise to his feet, although he had to maintain a respectful distance and his head stayed bowed. He was speaking quite loudly and fervently, and reminded me of adherents of those religions less civilized than our own. Then, suddenly, unbelievably, he pointed straight at my hiding place. I was stunned for a moment, and then the true import of Cabal's plan struck me. There had never been any intention to stop Ktharl, only to save his own neck in the apocalypse that he knew was coming, and I was to be the first sacrifice in his survival. Swearing bitterly, I brought my rifle up, aimed straight at Cabal, and fired. I'm a good shot, and my aim was true, but the bullet never arrived. That accursed Ktharl, that disgusting abomination, that should have been dead 700 years ago, simply reached out and plucked the ball from the air. He studied it, lying in his palm for a second or two, eminently unimpressed by the best modern science had to throw at him, and then he raised his hand to his mouth and blew gently. Some instinct made me dive to one side, but not fast enough to avoid being winged by that selfsame bullet as it shot back at me as fast as from any rifle barrel. It was plain that I couldn't fight him. My only chance was to escape from him and his new cur, Cabal, in the forest, get back to civilization, and try to convince the authorities of this incredible story. I slung the rifle over my shoulder and started running. I risked a look back and saw Ktharl sweeping after me across the leaf litter as if he were gliding across ice, Cabal running doggedly in his wake. My only advantage was speed, but even that would be lost if I became exhausted. Ktharl was inexorable, his steady progress indefatigable. I considered my options and decided to forget about losing them amidst the trees, and instead try to find a dwelling with, I hoped, a horse. I finally understood why it had been so important in Cabal's plan for me to leave the cave, because in doing so, I had already left behind any chance of reaching the horses stabled there. Furious with myself for trusting him, I ran and ran and ran. My path was along and down the side of the hill in the direction I guessed the Sensen border lay. On reaching the base, I struck out across the forest floor and hoped for the best. Every time I looked back, Ktharl was there. I don't know why he didn't just kill me there and then. It must certainly have been within his power. Perhaps he had another use for me, and that was something I didn't wish to think about, and which spurred me onwards with still more desperation. It was a nightmarish situation, one that I hope never to repeat, and, God willing, never will accept within my nightmares. My wounded arm bled steadily, my headlong flight preventing any hope of its closing. As the seconds of running turned into minutes, I had the unappealing thought that Ktharl was somehow tracking me by my drops of blood I left in my wake, and that he could smell them, perfumed with my fear. It was by the merest good luck that when I found the gorge, I didn't fall headlong into it, so harried was I. It was more than deep enough to kill a man, perhaps 80 feet into a fast-moving torrent with sharp rocks on either side. Scaling the side was impossible without equipment and the time needed for the descent. I had no choice but to run alongside it. The ground started to angle upwards, and I began to fear for my endurance again as every step became a torment in itself. The incline wasn't great, but in my exhausted state, it was the last thing I needed. Then, thank God, I saw the bridge. The bridge was a rope affair, obviously not meant for carts or horses or other beasts. Even to a man, the crossing of 60 feet or so across the ferocious drop would have been a little daunting. Anything was better than staying on the same side of the river as Ktharl, and I quickly crossed the bridge, swinging and twisting beneath my feet as I firmly gripped the rails and ran like a tightrope walker with the devil on his coattails. This was a double hope for me. Perhaps Ktharl would not be able to cross the bridge. What with his weakness for running water, perhaps, like a vampire, he wouldn't be able to pass over it. Second, even if he could, it would be my delight and my privilege to cut the guy ropes loose when he and I hoped Cabal were halfway across. I enjoyed the prospect of the pair of them tumbling into the angry white waters below. I fear I may have even been laughing a little hysterically by the time I reached the far side. Barely had I attained a hiding place by the mooring post when Ktharl swept majestically into view, and without even a pause, moved onto the bridge. It would seem that my first hope was to be confounded. The sight of Cabal staggering exhaustedly up to the mooring post on the other side, and leaning on them while he wheezed unhappily, reminded me of the second. I reached into my pocket for my clasp knife with murder in my heart. My hand found nothing but an old receipt and the stub of a pencil. The knife wasn't there. I almost cried out loud with frustration. Of course it wasn't. Those damnable and damned bandits had stolen it from my corpse back when they relieved me of all my other belongings and my horse. I looked behind me. The path rose in a sharp zigzag up very steep forested slopes. I couldn't hope to get far. My reserves were gone, and the jig was up, but I was damned if I was going to go down without a fight. Anger making me think clear, I unlimbered my rifle from my shoulder and took careful aim at the approaching sorcerer. I breathed gently, and just as my breath was on its cusp, squeezed the trigger. My first shot caught him square in the chest, but made him pause only momentarily, as if he'd forgotten something and then decided it was not important. The second bullet struck him in the face. I think I had some vague thought of puncturing one of those eyes in the hope that they were where his power lay. That is how desperate I had become. I heard the bullet ricochet off him as if it had struck rock. He shook his head as if bothered by an insect and advanced. I was down to my last bullet, and all hope had run out. Ktharl was clearly utterly invulnerable to mundane weapons. On the other hand, I doubted the same could be said of that turncoat Cabal, and I decided to let him have the last shot. I was grateful that the bandit whose rifle it had been had shown more concern with his maintenance of his weapon than with his personal hygiene. Every shot I had so far fired had gone exactly where I had placed it. Despite the bandit's peripatetic lifestyle, the barrel was well maintained, the action was reliable, and the sights were perfect. I trusted them implicitly as I paced foresight twixt back leaf and centered the whole point upon Cabal. I aimed at his head with the expectation of the bullet's trajectory, taking it into either his throat or his upper chest. Either would be satisfactory. He was still wheezing pathetically, his whole frame heaving with the effort of drawing breath as he stood half-slumped against the mooring post. Then I paused. There was something peculiar there, something odd in the way he was moving. I lowered my sights and was delighted and ashamed by what I saw. His body wasn't heaving with exhaustion at all, but with exertion. Exertion as he sawed fiercely through the guy supporting on one side of the bridge with a small pocket knife. The whole thing had truly been a ruse. Cabal had been looking for such an opportunity and had now taken it with both hands. Without a further second's hesitation, I brought my rifle back up to the target and fired. It wasn't a clean shot, I'm embarrassed to admit. I can only plead unfamiliarity with the weapon at that range, but still it clipped the second guy rope nicely, severing a good half of its strands. Cabal almost dropped his knife with surprise, but saw what I had tried to do and waved at me. He redoubled his efforts, and the rope he was working on parted with a woody snap. The bridge leaned crazily to that side, and Ktharl showed more emotion than I'd seen up until now. He actually seemed quite angry. The weight of the bridge was too much for the rope I'd damaged, and with a musical twang that gave way too. Now anchored only on my side of the gorge, it fell and swung to smash against the cliff wall. Bits of wood and debris rained into the stream to be instantly carried away. Ktharl, however, was not amongst them. With a countenance of utter fury, he hung in the air in the middle of the gorge, defying both gravity and our fondest hopes. I was at my wit's end and had been for some time. Cabal was not, and that is something we should all be grateful for. He reached into his breast pocket and threw something at that remorseless monster. Ktharl, he shouted, as whatever it was glittered and shone in its arc. Catch! I like to think it was Ktharl's utter arrogance, his total belief in his invulnerability that proved his downfall. He should have done almost anything except catch what had been thrown to him. I think Cabal, in his brief acquaintanceship with Ktharl, had seen it in his character and played upon it. What is it that they say comes before a fall? At any rate, Ktharl caught it. The object had barely been in his hand a moment when it flashed an angry cobalt blue that illuminated the warlock so strongly I had the absurd impression that I could see his bones within him. With rising hope, I realized what it was. A tiny thing, nothing at all in the usual way of things. A small vial, 2/3 full, of holy water. The water must have boiled in its tube because it broke with the distinctive plink of fracturing glass I remembered so well from my dawdlings in chemistry as a boy. It must have been like a tube of acid shattering in his hand. Not enough to kill him, or even hurt him, but more than enough to engage his full attention, to break his concentration, and really, at that point, that was all that was necessary. The holy water flared and streamed like St. Elmo's fire where it splashed upon him. He made some small, pathetic effort to beat the supernatural flames from his hand and arm, and then he was falling. It took only a moment to plummet the distance, and he was gone, lost in the frothing waters. Cabal and I ran downstream, eager to make sure that he didn't make the bank. This time I'm sure I was laughing with sheer relief. That would be tomorrow. It wasn't the end of everything. I saw Umtak Ktharl first, just the hint of an arm waving in the turbulent water of an eddy pool, pinned against a rock underwater, once again having his sins washed away constantly. "He's finished!" I shouted with delight across the roar of the river. "He is no such thing," Cabal shouted back. "He could get washed free, the water level could drop in high summer, somebody might find him, anything could happen. He's contained for the moment, but he isn't finished by a long chalk." He started walking back upstream. "I need to think." I could barely get a word out of him for the next couple hours as we trudged along, each on our respective side of the gorge. Then the river started to rise and the gorge to become shallow, and finally we found another bridge. A properly metalled road bridge this time, and joined our paths. It was clear that we were leaving the wildlands, and towards nightfall we reached, quite unexpectedly, but very welcome all the same, a customs post. We were on the border between Senzin and Markarvia, actually on the Senzin side. I had crossed the border days earlier while delirious. We must have looked very disreputable as we approached the building, and a couple of officers came out to greet us. We went inside and were glad of their offer of a pot of coffee while they questioned us. About the only thing the bandit had left me with were my papers, and these the commanding officer took and studied closely. Satisfied, he turned to Cabal and asked to see his passport. Cabal sighed and shrugged. "I'm afraid my papers were lost in my escape." Then he looked at the officer in the eye and said, "My name, however, is Gerhard Meisner. I was formerly a docket clerk first class in the Markarvian Department of Administrative Coordination. I am claiming political asylum." I looked at him oddly until he sent me a warning glance that made me compose and comport myself more neutrally. The customs officer looked at him oddly and started flicking through the sheets on his clipboard. He found what he was looking for and nodded. "Of course, Herr Meisner, you have been expected." Cabal's face was a picture. He looked utterly blank for a moment. Then he pulled himself together. "I am? That is to say, excellent. I must admit I was worried about the loss of my documents." "Inconsequential, Signor. The Minister of Interior will need to speak to you, of course. You must be interviewed." "Of course," replied Cabal. But I could see his confusion. They organized a horse and trap for us, and we rode in silence for the few miles to the nearest town, Sedil. The only time Cabal, I assume his real name was Cabal, spoke was to point out the watercourse running parallel to the road. "If that ever dries up," he said, "we're all in a lot of trouble." "And that's your story, Enright?" asked Chiltern in the silence. "That's my story," replied Enright. "At least it's most of my story. There is a small coda. 2 unusual things happened the first night in Sedil. At about 2 a.m, the whole town was woken by an explosion. A distant thing it was, several miles away, but the rumble traveled through the earth and tumbled people out of their beds and tiles from the rooftops. Those who had been awake at that hour said there was a strange flash in the sky to the south, which turned to an angry cobalt glow hanging over the forest and took minutes to fade." "Oh!" said Tompkinson excitedly. "I know what that was." He pondered for a moment and then shook his head. No, I don't. Carry on." "And the second thing?" asked Monroe. "Well, I only found out about that the next morning. Cabal was gone, vanished into the shadows. He obviously had a few secrets. He didn't want the authorities to learn. Nobody was much concerned about his absconding, nearly as much about the outrage that had committed the night before. The Archbishop of Perilla was visiting the parish. Shortly after midnight, a mysterious stranger had dragged him out of bed at gunpoint. The poor Archbishop was forced into his robes and driven to a small river that runs by the town. There his assailant had put a gun to his head and told him to bless the river and to keep blessing it until he was told to stop. The Archbishop, quite reasonably under the circumstances, blessed the river waters for all he was worth. At about 2 o'clock, there was a blue flash, In the sky, reflecting upwards from some sort of explosion in the forest, the Archbishop's assailant seemed very pleased, said something about being able to sleep now, and left him there. The Archbishop's description of the stranger sounded awfully like Cabal. There was a respectful silence broken by Tompkinson saying, "No, I don't understand." "I'll explain it to you next week," said Monroe. "I'm tired now, though, so I'll take my leave of you gentlemen. Good night, Enright. Thank you for the fascinating story." They broke up and started to make their varied ways home. In the cloakroom, Kay bumped into Enright, putting on his overcoat. As they made their way across the foyer to the exit in the city night, Kay asked him, "Johannes Cabal, did you ever find out who he was?" "I made inquiries when I got home," he replied. "Turned out he's a little infamous in some circles." "A spy?" Enright smiled and leaned towards me confidentially. "A necromancer," he whispered. He seemed to find Kay's expression of shocked outrage still more amusing. "Look at the bright side, Kay. I'm very glad he turned out to be a necromancer rather than, say, a docket clerk, even a first-class one. So should you. A lot of use he would have been then. Good night." And that's the end of Johannes Cabal the Detective. Whoever asked what we were reading, if you're still here, if they did not leave, Johannes Cabal the Detective is the end, the Tomb of Umtak Ktharl. Bo, it got a little shaky there for a second. My contact in this eye completely slipped off my fucking whole pupil. I don't know what happened there, but this whole eyeball is blurry. Oh my god. So all the words were looking real funky. Everybody's internet is going out. Are we all okay? Did people get to hear? Thank you, Thorny. I really appreciate that. I hope you got to hear most of it. Jeez. It's the Ancient Warlock's fault. Anytime there's somebody with any sort of deification-esque level powers, the internet goes out. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. It's the name. Yeah. I gotta stop saying people's names. We gotta start abbreviating them. People are gonna be so confused. People were already confused. I know someone was in here that's not normally in here, and they were like, "What are they reading?" And I was like, "I'll respond later." Go feed your sharks. I'll have to get off here soon. I don't know who came in here. Someone came in here while I was reading. And I'm unsure if it was like Dinky's sister leaving. No. No. I'm not doing that. You can do that on your own. You go live on your account and you do that on your own time. I'm not gonna break people's internet for no reason. This is Tangled. That's what this is happening. All right. So that was the end. We finished the whole of book 2. Finished the whole thing. We've read 2 whole books just on TikTok Live. I think that's kind of wild. I didn't think this was going to work out very well. Because I didn't think people were going to sit here the entire time and listen to me read. So it's kind of wild that we read 2 whole fucking books on this live. Just reading whole books. Nobody knows what we're doing in here. It's kind of great. Every once in a while I'll see comments on my peripheral that'll be like, "What is happening in this live? What are they reading? What's going on?" And I can't respond. 3 more to go. The third one is my favorite. We also have a bunch of short stories that I think we're going to take another break and read some short stories. Yeah, we're not forgetting the short stories. I still have to read you my favorite one, and my favorite one is The Long Spoon, but we're gonna have a fun time. The Long Spoon, I'm trying to think of which one's the longest. Probably I'd say as long as, I don't think any of them are as long as Exeunt Demon King. And we did that one in one live, so I think it'll be fine. Yeah, we're going to do some shorts next week. We're going to do some of the short stories. And I think we are going to because I gotta be honest. There's a few of them that are not entirely relevant to the plot. And then there's some that are. The ones that are the Aresh Kugel working, which is the subplot with Maleficaris, and the Long Spoon, which introduces a character that you will find out about in the 5th book. Well, you'll find out about him in the short story before we get to the 5th book. But you'll know who they are by the time we get to the 5th book, because they have a short story all on their own. And those are the two that are integral to the actual plot. My personal favorite outside of those two is Ouroboros Ozo, which Cabal sits around drinking with himself. And you'll know what that means when we get to it. It's different. I like that one. It's very inventive, and it's very funny, and it's real short. It's not that long at all. And House of Gears is unrelated. It doesn't necessarily have any mention of it in the actual plot. It's not related to any of the other ones. But basically, House of Gears, he meets another necromancer that he was told succeeded. And he learns how he did it. And it doesn't live up to his standards. So that one's a fun one. Years ago, I had to scour the internet for that, and then I realized they had made the zine. They made an electronic version. The magazine that I used to be a part of, they made an electronic version where you can just read it on air. And I was like, wow, you really made this a whole lot easier, since I had to go on a scavenger hunt for it years ago. House of Gears is weird, yeah. So that'll be fun. Once again, if you're new here and you haven't been here before, there's a YouTube channel. And if you're wondering what the fuck we are talking about, all the recordings are on the YouTube channel. We're also going to read 2 short stories next week that you probably never heard of before. And if you want to know the character that we're talking about, you can go on the YouTube series. I don't know what else to tell you if you don't want to do that. If you don't want to do that, get the hell out of this live. What are you doing here? That's all we're doing here, is reading. And this isn't going to be fun for you. So get out now, or forever hold your peace. Yeah, I like House of Gears. That one was weird as shit and different in its take. Like, I like that it was different. Like, you think of Johannes as very scientific and pragmatic, and then they introduce another character that, I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't heard the story, but is even more scientific and pragmatic to a fault. And it's fun. And House of Gears always makes me think of Sarah. But yeah, we're going to get to it. And I'm unsure which ones we want to do next week. You can vote if you would like. Which ones we want to do. Or do you want me to choose? I'll choose. But I just thought, because we've read Blustery Day and we've read Exant Demon King. So we have, of those are the ones that are left, the one that I mentioned. So we can take a vote on it if we want. If we want to vote on it in the redacted area, that's cool. If you want to, I don't know, DM me on Instagram, me choose? Okay, that's a choice, I guess. Seconded. I think we're gonna do next week. I think we'll do the ones that are unrelated, or at least we'll do one that's related to the plot and one that's not. That way, there's like an even mix. We'll do House of Gears, and we'll do the Ereshkigal working. So you have Maleficaris's second half of his backstory, because we already got the first with Maleficaris Senior, and that was Exant Demon King. That was basically why Maleficaris Jr. was so hacked off in the first book. That was the reason. And then we'll have his first encounter with Maleficaris Jr. and the Ereshkigal working. And I think that'll be an even mix, because then by the time we get done with the third one, we will have some of my two favorite short stories left. Ouroboros and Long Spoon, which will introduce a relative character to the last one. And one that I'm very excited for you to find out, those who have not read the short stories yet. Because that's going to be fun. And also, I've kind of been holding off on posting some of the Johannes content that I make. One, because I feel like I can because I want to be proud of it, first of all. But also because we're kind of holding out for one of the characters that Dinky is going to cosplay. So, that'll be fun. But yeah, I have Johannes content coming. I know it's been a while, and you're probably wondering if I'm ever going to actually post anything. We are. We've been filming. It's just I can only film one day a week. And for the past 2 weeks, I haven't been able to get together with, Horst or Layla. And we don't have the stuff for the other character yet. But we're still doing it, and we're still planning it, and we have some location-based stuff and some technical stuff to work out with a green screen and some lighting situations that are proving difficult. We'll get there. I just have to learn how to do some stuff. Sarah is also learning how to do some stuff to help us with the editing of this, because Sarah doesn't ever appear in any of the videos or really anything. He cosplays more for his own enjoyment than for doing any sort of content. And he just sort of helps us edit stuff. So we're seeing what we can make with this. The intermission in one of the YouTube videos was made with assistance by Sarah. And it's like a little Easter egg. If you ever did see that video, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I don't know what to tell you. But should be fun. So I think that's what we're going to do next week. And then we will start on my favorite of all of the 5, the Fear Institute, the week after. Thank you. Appreciate that. We worked really hard on it. Also, the software was being real janky. It was giving us a hard time when we were trying to line up all the different screenshots from that. It was being really annoying. So I'm glad you think so, because it was definitely a piece of work when we were trying to do it. Now, imagine if you can. You're trying to get a shot in front of a moving train that you only have one shot to do before it gets dark and the train schedule shifts. So if you don't get that shot, you're just fucked. Imagine, if you will, such an endeavor. And you'll kind of get a glimpse of how frustrated I am. Fun stuff. It's going really well, guys. I almost contemplated hijacking the dinner train. Either way, I'm getting a train. Or not. I might never get it, and we might have to do a shot a different way. So annoying. So perpetually. I'm so aggravated. I've never been more aggrieved in my life. Trying to accomplish shots in front of moving trains is a monster. But I have to update my, can I help you? Hello? Come here. Come here. Yeah, come on. Yeah, come on. Hop up here. No. Don't chew wires. Don't do that. Don't do that. Hey, don't do that. Come here. Hi. Say hi to your adoring public. Here's Pond, everybody. For everybody who's been telling me to include Pond, she likes to chew on wires and mess up my ring light. So this is why Pond's not normally invited. But Pond shoved the door open and included herself against my wishes. Sarah is here to take Pond.
That's my name, Sarah?
Yes.
Okay.
Here you go. You got her? Yeah. I know. She's so heavy.
Sorry.
Yeah, Pond. That's my cat. She likes to come in here and chew wires and knock my ring light over. She's hefty. She's a big girl. So she likes to throw her weight around and knock all my shit over. And that's why she's normally not in here. Otherwise, if she was more chill, she would be here every single time. She's so fluffy and adorable. And she makes a great pillow. And she's a great reading buddy. As long as you aren't talking to the internet and are surrounded by wires. If you're reading by yourself and you're just chilling, great reading buddy. Doesn't move, just sort of lays there. Yeah, grooms your hair. It's very nice. It's very relaxing for me, personally. When I have wires, she just sort of like pushes her whole weight. And if you put any amount of weight on this wire down here, like the whole stand is going to fall over. You're going to get a great view of my floor before. Yeah, I generally don't let her style my hair with the wig on. She tries, but I'll normally notice when she sneaks up behind me. But yeah, you're going to get a great view of my floor right before it hits the ground. And if I'm trying to read a book, that's going to be very distracting. If she'd just chill behind me, because that's what she does when I'm reading in here anyway. She'll just sort of lay on the back of the futon and chill. And it's nice. But when there's wires involved, she's supremely interested more in the wires. I was wondering what happened. I was like, I thought Danky was coming in here to say something, and then I noticed there was nobody in the doorway. I can't even see her on the desk. I just knew it was her from the fact that nobody else is in the doorway. So I was like, are you, what do you want? Yeah, she's probably mad because the live's running long. This is normally my chill time with Pond at this point. In the past few weeks, my live has ran a little bit longer, and she starts coming in here, and she's like, what are you doing? You're missing our hangout time. And I'm in here talking to the internet. Yeah, for real. And, me and Sarah were her favorites, so if Sarah's busy, she's on me. Bella, is, Bella's favorites, Danky and, yeah, Danky. But if I run late, she'll come in here and be like, what are you doing? Which is adorable, but the door doesn't like stay closed because there's a rack on the back of it that I hang my suit on and some of my wigs and also a machete. Don't ask. So it doesn't close all the way, so you can just push it open, and she just pushes it open with impunity. She belonged here. Bella will just let you touch her toes. Like, doesn't care. Pond's the one that hates it. And she's also got the wonky claw. You know, the one, you can hear it coming because she clicks it against the floor. No, it's in here now. It's in here. I'm not going to show it because I'm going to get banned. Yeah, no, my suit's on the back of the door, the machete's on the back of the door, and my other wig's on the back of the door. What time is it? Yeah, it's 11:30. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Pond's just my alarm. And last time we ran long too, so she was like, what's going on? What are you doing? Yeah, it's getting late. We're gonna have to get off here soon. And I have to go pay attention to my cat. And also, I'm out of coffee. Not that that's indicative of anything necessarily, but this is water. And the longer we're on here, I don't know when or if Danky's gonna rant and voice chat for a while. Bring the cat to the dad. I mean, I guess I could. She's not very vocal. She purrs very loudly. You might be able to hear it on mic or something. But we don't normally do that with, like, video. So, like, I mean, I could turn it on and let you see her if you wanted. She'll normally just chill back here. But yeah, I think that's going to do us. I think you fell asleep. That's okay. That's what I'm here for, to put you all to sleep. I read you a bedtime story, you fall asleep, we're all good. That's my best talent, putting people to sleep. I'm boring. No. I know I'm not. I just am apparently very soothing to people, which is great, because I actually try and put more energy into the live than I do actually have naturally, and it takes a lot out of me. So... And the fact that I do that and I'm still able to put people to sleep, kind of a talent, in my opinion. I'm pretty proud of it. It's fine. But I gotta go make myself a smoothie and hang out with my cat and probably hop in voice chat and put some more people to sleep. Whoever wants me to read more disturbing stories that I can't read on TikTok for fear of getting banned. Might start a thing up for that, where we do that in the redacted area. Because I really want to read y'all the truth, because I love that story. Cannot read it on TikTok. I will be banned so fast. So fast. You kidding? And it won't just be like a 3-day, like, we're going to put you in timeout. They're going to be like, you can never do this again. Like, yeah, it would be rapid. So I might do that. I have downloaded it on my computer and my phone, so that depending on which one I have Discord in, I can record in one. I might put it on YouTube. I don't know if I can put it on YouTube. I'll just age restrict it on YouTube, but you can't really do that on TikTok, and I think that's one of the main problems is, you know, like if it's not a degree of acceptable, TikTok will just ban you for no reason. And there's also like people who get away with large amounts of bullshit that they should not get away with on TikTok, and then simultaneously nothing. You can get away with nothing and everything potentially, but it has to be one extreme or the other. It can't just be like kind of bad. It has to be so terrible that TikTok will never notice, or it has to be just slightly terrible for TikTok to be like, that shit, get it out of here. And I don't really know what the in-between is. Because I've seen some stuff that definitely should not be on there, but like totally is for no reason. Maybe YouTube will be a little bit better if I just age restrict the really crazy ones, like the Troop. It's just got a lot of body horror in it. I don't know. I don't want to risk that on TikTok, but I might find a way to upload it separately. I don't know. I'm going to have to clear out some space on my phone. I have plenty of space on my computer, though, so I might record it on there while I do it in voice chat. I'm not sure how to work it out yet. I'm still working out the kinks. But if I can manage it, because I'd like for people to be able to enjoy it but not have to stay up super duper late, because I know I stay up super duper late because I work super duper late and I'm kind of an insomniac, and I only sleep when the sun comes up, and then only for normally about 4 hours maybe. So Sarah thinks it's the amount of coffee I drink. I think I can't perform unless I have a certain amount of coffee. Yeah, like Sarah was like telling me, like, he was like, I don't know how your live got banned last time. I was scrolling and I came across a live where they were being very intimate just publicly and nothing happened, and I was like, for real though. But I get banned for, I'm not going to say it because I feel like for legal reasons the last live was a joke. But we get banned for talking about the conspiracy theory we were talking about, which is really only problematic to Michelle's ears. For legal reasons, that is also a joke. Do not come for me. Please don't ban this live. But you can just straight up get busy with somebody on TikTok Live, and TikTok doesn't take it down. Seems sus. Yeah, I still haven't figured out if it's like disproportionately affecting cosplayers or not. I haven't gathered enough evidence for that. And to be real, there's no point in gathering evidence anyway. TikTok doesn't have any actual people manning this, so it's all automated. Like, nobody is super. It's fine. I'm not super concerned about it, other than the fact that I can't do these lives if I get like perma-banned or whatever. But that would be the worst outcome. There's no people. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. Nobody, but it's fine. We'll figure out a way. We just gotta finagle with shit. We gotta jump through some hoops. We'll figure it out. It'll be fine. But I'm gonna work that out. And I know some people were wanting me to stream Binding of Isaac, because I've been just sort of playing it on voice chat, and people have been like, they were like, we want to see you die a bunch of times. And I was like, that seems fair. So I'm going to see if I can get the cable to do that and see if we can make that happen too. So there's stuff, there's happenings, there's things going on that I am looking into. I don't have people enough in my life to play a board game. And I don't know, I bet Sarah would be about it. I don't know if Dinky would be about a board game. Unsure. Yeah, I'm terrible at most of it. I thought I was good at video games, and then I was like, you know what? I've had Binding of Isaac for a while, and I've never played it because I just end up playing Pokemon and We Happy Few. Dad, yeah. That'd be dope. But I don't know any other people, so like, depending on how, like, such a good game. I love that game. I know your collection, yeah. But you also see people. I'm with people for an hour and I start losing my mind. I don't know if I would be able to do that playing this game. I get absolutely infuriated. And I don't stay in one place. I'll get up, I'll walk around, I'll pace. I can't sit still whenever I get super angry. And this game makes me angry. And I don't normally get super angry. I'm normally pretty chill and I can stay in one spot for hours. Binding of Isaac makes me mad. Actively mad. I don't know if the mic picked that up. That was a gunshot out. It was like a block over, and so it wasn't super. Dad, are you home? Did you hear that? I might go. Yeah. Yeah. I was like, what the? That was cool. Like one street over. It was probably off Amy. Yeah, I'm like, this isn't my business. I want to close this window. I'm going to get off this live. I'll see you guys in the redacted area. Later, probably. Maybe 15 minutes. I don't know. It could be any time. But I'm going to get off here and I'm going to not worry about that. And I'm going to go find my cat. So this has been real. You all have a good night. Stay hydrated if you're drinking a smoothie. And I will see you next Tuesday at 8 for some short stories.